Good morning and welcome to the Planning Commission hearing for June the 6th. If you'll join me in the flag salute.
Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Villalobos, if you'll do the TV coverage announcement and the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the Commission. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on CSB TV's website as well as the county's YouTube channel and will be available for download in a day or two. Now for the roll call, Commissioner Park.
Present.
Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Commissioner Farini.
Here.
Commissioner Brown. And Chair Blau.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Wilson, if you'll now do our agenda status report and a projection report.
Chair Blau, members of the commission, good morning. The status of the agenda today is that there are 2 items on the standard agenda that have been requested to return back to you for your review and consideration today. The Ag Employee Dwelling and the Highway 101 Local Coastal Program Amendment is back on the agenda. Staff is ready and prepared to present both of those items today.
Thank you.
Projection, you want me to move forward to the projection report?
Yes, please.
So our next meeting is scheduled for, at our last meeting we canceled the June 27th meeting. So our next meeting is July 11th. And there's 2 items on that. The hoop structure is coming back for your review and consideration. And then there's a tentative parcel map that has been projected to be before you at that time. Following that, we did, I believe, take action last week to cancel the July 25th hearing. I did see an item was placed on there. We'll work with staff to reschedule that. But from my recollection, we did cancel that hearing.
Yes, we did.
And then following that, we will return on August 1st for three items have been projected for that hearing at this time. The Patterson appeal is returning, and then there's civil use determination, and then another recorded map modification. And then following that, there are no other items until August 29th projected, which is a appeal on August 29th. And I think that's where we have at this point on the projection report.
Any questions from commissioners? I don't see any lights come on. We'll go on to Planning Commission informational reports. Okay, not seeing any. I will now take public comment for anything not on today's agenda. Do we have any slips? I don't see any slips. No one rising. So I think we'll now go to the director's report.
Chair Blau, members of the commission, I will be standing in for Director Black today. There has been one Board of Supervisor hearing since we last met last week, which was yesterday. The one item of interest potentially to this commission is that the CEO's office brought a recovery strategic plan to the Board of Supervisors for their review and comments. And that basically captures all of the efforts and projected efforts of multiple county agencies, outreach to other organizations within the community to address how to, move forward with recovery in the Montecito community. And so that strategic plan was presented to the Board of Supervisors yesterday and identified at least 7 issues that went all the way from addressing future evacuations to the rebuilding process to looking at how to outreach and communication efforts. So there's a number of areas that were identified that touch on multiple areas of the county government that has been working together collaboratively to address the 1-9 debris flow and the Thomas Fire. And so that may be of interest to your commission if you would like to review that. It's on the agenda or on the hearing for yesterday for the Board of Supervisors. Another item of interest to this commission is that the cannabis ordinance is effective and will be moving forward tomorrow with initial activities to begin permitting, and that will be done in this office, the Santa Barbara offices. And P&D is working with the auditor's office, the treasurer's office, and the county principal on the accounting practices. It is my understanding that the Board of Supervisors were advised that the accounting mechanisms are in place to take in the fees and initiate the permitting process. So that is happening, and we have a team put together for the planning side to deal with that. In addition, the county, our office is proposing at next week's budget hearings 2.5 positions for code enforcement to supplement our program that we're doing. So we have 2 halves of that process, the permitting and the enforcement side. So that's what we'll be taking forward next week at the budget hearings.
Just on the enforcement side, will one be in North County and one in South County? How will you distribute them?
Commissioner Freeney, through the chair. So what we're trying to do at this time is set up a team of permitting and enforcement. And so the enforcement is going to cover the entire county. And so to localize it, maybe starting down here, but they will be covering the whole county, north and south. And so we're looking at all options of how to allocate our resources best so that there's coverage in the north and in the south counties. But there's going to be, we're asking for 2.5 people, so there's a lot of ground to cover for 2.5 people. So that person's going to see a lot of the county as they investigate these complaints that come in.
Commissioner Brown?
Thank you. So are you wrapping in the short-term rental and homestays into the sort of the same enforcement effort, or is something different? Because I was led to believe that I thought that you kind of had an enforcement team for all of these.
Commissioner Brown, through the chair, right now our efforts are focused on the code enforcement, and that's what those positions are being requested for, is to look at the code enforcement aspect of it.
Commissioner Park?
You know, I'm glad you brought this up, that which positions you're focusing on, and I think I heard you say that budget hearings are next week. I spoke with Supervisor Hartman about a concern of mine last week that I'm going to voice. It appears to me that we have been processing a lot of ordinances, and we've got a lot more to process, and others that we need to work on, like lighting and so forth, we keep bringing up. And a huge bottleneck in our process, as we all know, is long-range planning. We don't have enough funding for long-range planning. And I raised that concern with Supervisor Hartman, asked her what we could do about, what I could do about it as a planning commissioner. One idea I had, and I'll just voice it here in case it is helpful, might come up planning at budget hearings, is perhaps the appointment of some sort of blue ribbon panel of citizens and people involved in the planning process to think of innovative ways to get more funding into this department for long-range planning. Fees, whatever, would be useful. So that's why I wanted to ask about when does long-range planning occur, and when does budget hearing occur, and it's happening right now. Probably we can't fix this for next year, but we need to be working on it because we run into it every single time. Look at the Coastal Commission knocking out our short-term rental ordinances. How are we going to have the bodies to work out a new plan? You know, we run into this over and over again. I'm preaching to the choir. Sorry.
Commissioner Park, to the chair, I don't know if that required a response. The budget hearings are next week. We're anticipating that our department will be on Monday the 11th, and we're anticipating that it'll probably start after lunch, will be the budget hearings for our department. And they'll be looking at some of the things that you've just talked about as far as long-range planning and funding and their work program and a number of issues related to that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other lights or questions. Thank you. So I believe we're ready for our first standard agenda item. So Mr. Villalobos, if you'll read that into the record.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on a request of the Planning and Development Department that the County Planning Commission recommend that the Board of Supervisors adopt ordinance case numbers 18 ORD 2 and 3, and recommend that the Board of Supervisors determine that no subsequent environmental document shall be prepared for this project pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act Guidelines Section 15162.
Thank you. So Ms. Steele, are you going to give us the staff report this morning?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Blau and Commissioners. My name is Jessie Steele, and today I'm going to be discussing the Agricultural Employee Dwelling Ordinance amendments and continue our discussion from the hearing of May 9th. So just as a reminder, the intent of this project was to make some minor changes that could easily streamline and downshift the permit requirements for ag employee dwellings. And it was intended to provide some immediate housing relief that could be done within the scope of the negative declaration that was adopted for the housing element. And on May 9th, staff presented the proposed AED ordinance amendments to your commission, who had several recommended revisions. And after researching several issues associated with these recommendations, as shown in the memo provided to you today and dated May 29th, We have created a revised LUDC permit structure that we believe can accommodate most of your recommendations and also stay within the existing environmental review framework that we're working with for this project. And with us here today, we do have David Bremond from Environmental Health Services to help answer any questions that you may have about ag employee dwellings and the permitting process. And also something else to keep in mind is that this project was initially separated from the agricultural tiered permitting project because we believed that it was a fairly limited scope of work and the environmental review had already been completed with the housing element negative declaration. But given some of the recommendations that we received from the last Planning Commission hearing, we may be going outside of the scope of that environmental review, and therefore this project may have to be reincorporated into ag tiered permitting if it does require additional environmental review. So moving on here, these tables show the PC's alternative proposal for the LUDC permit requirements. These are the numbers that you suggested at the May 9th Planning Commission hearing. And then below that is staff's revised permit structure that we believe fairly well mirrors what the Planning Commission had developed. So as you can see, staff adopted everything except there are some minor changes to the zoning clearance permit level. Given the disparity between the proposed AED permit requirements and the existing utility permit requirements, staff was concerned that increasing the occupancy limits too much would be misleading for applicants, especially since the LUDC may require a higher level permit for water or wastewater systems to serve the proposed number of employees that were in the PC's proposal. This is further complicated by the fact that employees can bring their families to live with them in AEDs, and the total occupancy affects the type of system that is required for utilities. So to reduce the likelihood of projects requiring several permits, one for the AED and another higher level permit for the utilities, staff recommends allowing only 1 to 4 employees with the zoning clearance and then shifting the LUP employee limits to 5 to 24. Staff also recommends adding footnotes to the zoning clearance and LUP permit requirements to indicate that there may be a higher level permit required for utilities in some circumstances. The PC's second recommendation was to reduce and or eliminate the employment location requirements for ag employee dwellings. And the PC didn't specify whether this should occur within the Ag 1 zone, Ag 2 zone, or both. But as stated in the staff memo, reducing or eliminating the employment location requirements may cause some compatibility issues, especially on small lots in the Ag 1 zone. Therefore, we're recommending that AEDs remain tied to the use of the land, and we should retain the employment location requirements in the Ag 1 zone. But to accommodate the PC's recommendations, there it goes. But to accommodate the PC's recommendations and to assist property owners with larger agricultural operations on non-contiguous parcels, we are going forward with the recommendation that we can remove employment location requirements in the Ag 2 zone.
So if I could stop you for a second. So if I read this correctly, and I don't want to make the same mistake where I read the chart wrong again this week, but you're saying that you're only going to require the 51% in the Ag 1 zone, but you would not require the 51% in the Ag 2 zone. Is that correct? Because I see it's green in the circle here, and it's green on the bottom. Does that mean the two correlate, or what am I looking at?
Chair Blau and Commissioners, the green is just to indicate where the employment location requirements will be. So that's for the zoning clearance, LUP, and MCUP permit levels in the Ag 1 zone. So for the zoning clearance and land use permit levels, we're recommending full-time on-site employment on the lot where the AED is located. And for AEDs permitted with a minor conditional use permit, they just need to do 51% or more of the work, the majority of the work on that site.
Okay, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was great discussion about that at our last hearing, and it was problematic, especially for the North County growers, because in a lot of cases, they have multiple locations for their farming operations, and they may be having the employees work on this location, this crop cycle, and other locations and other crop cycles. So it could be very well where they're very much below 51% for the parcel where the dwelling is located, but they're working on 100% of the farms that the particular grower might own. Did we ignore that, or did we address that issue?
Chair Blau and Commissioners, we did address that. At the last hearing, we heard that you specifically wanted to reduce the permit requirements for the Ag 2 zone inland area. But on Ag 1 parcels, there are a lot of potential conflicts that could come from not having any employment location requirements because they're smaller parcels, and there could be a disparity between the amount of housing on the land versus ag uses and some other issues. So we removed the employment location requirements completely from Ag 2, but kept them in Ag 1 for those reasons.
That's what I thought I read when I looked at this chart. I'm thinking that's why it's surrounded in green on the Ag 1, and the notes 1 and 2 are surrounded by green on the notes below. Those two correlate. So I did get that right. I did read the chart right this week. Good. I'm glad to hear that. If you'll continue, thank you.
I just have
Mr. Brown.
Yes, thank you. At our last meeting, I hadn't thought about this housing as necessarily that families would be housed in it, but that adds a complexity which you brought out in your comments, that it's the more people, the more intensive the use, the more of the utility systems might need to be on site. So zoning clearance might not work for even on the smallest parcels with 4 employees, because if you have housing for families, there's more bathrooms and more just bigger facilities. So I don't understand how it could just be a zoning clearance when environmental health, we need to hear from them, when they may have their own process that sort of bumps it up, that would need to bump it up from just a simple zoning clearance to perhaps a land use permit.
Chair Blau, Commissioner Brown, you're right. There is definitely a possibility that even if an AED is permitted with the zoning clearance, the utilities could require a higher level permit, and therefore you have this sort of weird situation where there are 2 permits required for the same project. However, it would be possible to do a zoning clearance for a project if perhaps there was not another dwelling on the site. Typically, and EHS may be able to speak to this better than I can, but typically there's a rule where there's 1 connection per dwelling for a utility system. So in the LUDC currently, the permit, it's exempt to have 1 connection to a water or wastewater system. So if there was not another dwelling on site and someone proposed an AED, they could go forward with the zoning clearance, provided that there are no other issues on the lot.
So it sort of depends. So it's a little bit deceiving that if I were a property owner, I can just get a zoning clearance, but it depends how many employees I have, how many connections I need. So it's not really reflected in this chart.
Chair Block, Commissioner Brown, if I may. Yeah, and that was exactly the reason why we've added these footnotes to clarify that. I mean, we don't typically have footnotes in our use tables, which are saying, be aware that if you apply for this type of use, you may require a high level permit for other aspects of the project. And also, I do want to clarify, this is also important because pursuant to CEQA, although the zoning clearance would be ministerial, the land use permit, or if a minor conditional use permit is required, that is discretionary, subject to CEQA, and CEQA does say that you evaluate the entirety of the project. So the ministerial aspect, the whole project, including the AED, not just the utility system, would be analyzed under an environmental document. Therefore, we felt it is very important to make this clear so that we do not mislead anybody to believe that just because a zoning clearance is required for the AED, once again, you may have other permitting requirements which may bump you back up to a higher level permit being required for the overall project.
Well, and also, doesn't the zoning administrator have the authority to make a determination that other requirements of the project besides the normal zoning clearance issues? In other words, if they determine that the project is more extensive or more complex than contemplated, they would have the authority to put in other conditions or require a conditional use permit. Am I correct? I mean, the zoning administrator doesn't have to clear the project. It could say, no, there's other issues and problems here that need to be addressed.
Yeah, specifically, Chair Blau. So the zoning administrator cannot dictate what type of permit or entitlement is required for the project, but if the type of entitlement is discretionary, the zoning administrator is afforded certain discretionary authority to make certain decisions about the project. For example, within the context of CEQA, the zoning administrator has a certain level of discretionary authority. But once again, the type of land use entitlement, that would not change. The zoning administrator does not dictate that specific aspect of the project.
Do you have more, Commissioner Brown?
I do, thank you. When we say 1 to 4 employees, 4 employees could be housed in one structure, right? Or they could be housed in 4 structures. Okay, so it depends. So when they come forward, if it's, or even if they had 5 employees in one structure, that would still bump it up to an LUP?
Commissioner Brown, through the chair, if an applicant is proposing to house up to 4 employees, that can be done, we're proposing with a zoning clearance, but if they came forward saying they wanted to house 5 employees, that would bump them up into the next land use permit level.
Even though they're housed in one structure where it's only one connection for the utilities?
That would be correct, yes.
And that's because of the amount of the volume of water and effluent? Was that why that is? I don't know, I'm just asking because I'm not really familiar with this.
Commissioner Brown, through the chair, we were keeping in line with what we had previously proposed to start when we started this project, and those numbers, the 1 to 4 employees and 5 and greater, that comes from existing LUDC permit requirements. But beyond that, you do bring up a good point about the number of occupants definitely do affect water and wastewater usage. And especially if these employees will be bringing their families, staff's concerned that going above 4 employees, whether they're in one dwelling or multiple dwellings, having families with them could be too many occupants.
Go ahead and continue.
Okay. So moving on to your commission's 3rd recommendation, you recommended allowing park models, mobile homes, and other types of trailers as agricultural employee dwellings, but specifically not RVs. And according to the Health and Safety Code, we did some research on park models, also called park trailers. The Health and Safety Code defines them as a trailer intended for human habitation for recreational or seasonal use only. And they're not to exceed 400 square feet of gross floor area or 14 feet in width. They must be built on a single chassis, and you have to have a special permit to transport them on the highway. Where are we going?
Commissioner Brown.
So, thank you for this, and thank you for the photo, and not really being familiar with this type of housing. So this just allowing a park trailer, which is a subset of a larger of trailers.
Maybe you better wait. We're frozen
okay,
on
sorry.
the screen here. Trying to follow you on the screen.
Okay, we're back. Go, Commissioner Brown.
Okay, so the language is describing the kind of vehicle or kind of structure is going to just be park models and trailers? And what is the definition that you're going to use for these structures? It's going to be more than just park mods, isn't it? Because you might want something that's bigger than 400 square feet.
Commissioner Brown, through the chair, we would include the Health and Safety Code definition of a park trailer, another term for it that people use as park model. But we are also proposing, maybe moving on to the next slide, staff's also proposing to allow mobile homes and manufactured homes as temporary and or permanent agricultural employee dwellings, because these are types of quote-unquote trailers that can be installed on a permanent foundation, but they don't have to be. But they're also easily connected to utilities, and importantly, they are inspected during the manufacturing process using state and federal standards. So our building and safety department does not have to inspect them if they're used as temporary agricultural employee dwellings. Building and safety would only need to inspect them and permit them if they're put on a permanent foundation.
So the definition or the indication of park trailer for human habitation for recreational seasonal use, are these only considered less permanent than mobile homes or other types of structures?
Commissioner Brown, through the chair, even though the definition does say they are intended for recreational or seasonal use, these are a special type of RV that's specifically intended, and says in the definition they're intended for human habitation. So they do have, they're made with the easy connections to hook up to utilities and things like that. They are small units, but they're easily portable, and they're just kind of made to be a good temporary unit, if that's what the applicant would want.
But when you say temporary, all these connections, the utilities and the wastewater, are going to be permanent. So having a temporary trailer, where I presume that means that you can move it. Is that what the intent is with these things, or do they become more permanent, like a mobile home? Or
Well, I think you are going to have an inspection and a permit to connect power and connect utilities and connect water to it. But I think the difference is that should we decide that in the future we don't need the farm housing on this particular farm, they can be removed and put someplace else, and you don't have the expense of having to rip up the foundation and destroy the concrete and do that sort of thing. It's like disconnect them, put them back on, put the wheels back on them, or however you transport them, and you can move them someplace else. That's kind of the difference, if I get that right. Commissioner Park.
Yeah, I just wanted to address some of the questions that Commissioner Brown asked. Notwithstanding that definition of that they're intended for recreational use or seasonal use, you find them used permanently in many locations. If you go to San Ynez, in that area between El Rancho and the high school, there's a development there that's nothing more than park mods. That they're nicely matched. It looks good. It looks better than the trailer park it replaced, and they're there as basically used as apartments. So they are permanently used. The wonderful feature of these is, as agricultural trends change, and they always do, we can take one of these park mods that's being used as agricultural housing and haul it away and leave the farmland there, rather than covering the farmland with concrete and things that you would need for foundations for a mobile home. So that's why some of us, including me, support them. Thank you.
And if you want to see some great examples of it, go to the Bealton Flying Flags. They've got a ton of them now. They're wine cottages, they're 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom. They're really nice housing. So anyway, if you continue, thanks.
So moving on to the Planning Commission's last recommendation, your commission suggested that we consider items brought up in Claire Weinman's public comment letter from the hearing of May 9th, which was included as attachment 2 in the staff memo provided to you today. So her first suggestion was to permit farm worker housing complexes with an LUP as opposed to a CUP. Second, to permit ag employee dwellings for up to 24 or 35 employees, or alternatively, ag employee dwellings up to 15,000 square feet with the zoning clearance. And lastly, she recommended permitting ag employee dwellings for more than 25 or 36 employees with a conditional use permit. And as discussed in the staff memo, these suggestions pertain to farm worker housing, which is defined and regulated separately from agricultural employee dwellings within the zoning ordinances. And that's largely because our zoning code mirrors the state regulations for farm worker housing. Farm worker housing is a program essentially that is operated under the state, where you would go through state certification, inspections. We just provide the permitting path for that at a local level. And one of the important distinctions too is that farm worker housing, excuse me, for farm worker housing, you have to provide that the families of the employees can live with them. But the county has provided an alternative with ag employee dwellings. It's an alternative for all other types of employee housing that does not meet those state requirements. And importantly, you can, but you're not required to, provide that employees can bring their families. So this is why the ag employee dwelling ordinance amendments would be the path for folks who are looking to use the federal H-2A program, because that does not allow visiting workers to bring their families. So given these differences, we are not recommending farm worker housing amendments at this time. We just believe those are outside the scope of this project. So lastly, the purpose of our visit here today is that we would like your commission to provide staff with input on the revised ag employee dwelling ordinance amendments, so that we can return to you on July 11th with finalized draft amendments, and then move on to the board in August. And again, if you did want to recommend other revisions that are outside the scope of the negative declaration adopted for the housing element, they can be considered, but it would be as part of the agricultural tiered permitting project and that EIR that will be completed at another time. And that concludes my presentation, and staff can answer any questions.
Mr. Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an elemental question. It's going backwards, but I feel I need to raise the issue of abuse of the ordinance, potential abuse. What do I have to show if I come in and seek a permit to place a trailer on my property and qualify it as an ag unit versus just something I want to have as a guest house, or you know, even an Airbnb with a nice Airstream trailer? But you know, we're trying to address a particular need, the need for more housing for agriculture, to benefit agriculture, a very worthwhile purpose. But I see the potential for abuse. So what is the county going to require in terms of the use of the trailer?
Chair Blau, Commissioner Cooney, in order to permit an agricultural employee dwelling, whether it be a temporary trailer or a permanent dwelling, part of the application is that the applicant must provide one of the following: either the employer's income tax return for the workers, and the employee's pay receipts, employer's DE3 form, a W-2 form, some type of notarized contract between the permittee and the employee that delineates the type of work and tasks that will be involved, and wages, or some other type of option approved by the director that shows the need, the demonstrated need for agricultural workers and the type of work that they will be doing on the property.
Well, is that an annual reporting then? I mean, if you put the trailer on there this year, do you have to resubmit the W-2 or the 10, whatever the document's going to be that it's still being used as an agricultural unit?
Chair Blau and Commissioners, yes, you're correct. There is a renewal process that occurs every 5 years where you do have to continue demonstrating the need for the ag employee dwellings on that particular lot. So you would have to resubmit this information again after 5 years.
Well, and I think I have a problem with your word, the need. I don't think that's what we're looking for. I don't need them to provide me the proof that they need the agricultural worker. I want to have proof that an agricultural worker is on the property, using the property. Do I have that about right? Is that your concern as well?
Exactly. My concern is times change. You've got the trailer there, and the use of the trailer is going to change with time. So even assuming 100% accuracy with regard to the application, how do we handle the situation where the trailer's over the back fence of a neighborhood, an existing established neighborhood? It's an Ag 1 property, and now the trailer is being rented out, and there's an issue for the neighborhood with the use of the trailer.
And wait 5 years before we recertify it. It's 4 years of abuse is what the potential, I think, problem is here. So it seems to me you're going to need some kind of language in there where they need to notify the county once a year and provide some proof that it's still being used as an agricultural residence.
Chair Blau and Commissioner Cooney, in addition to those types of proof of employment that we just discussed, within the zoning ordinances currently, there's also a provision saying that the applicant shall demonstrate the need for additional dwellings to support the existing or proposed agricultural use of the land. So we're very much trying to only permit these types of dwellings when there is a need and for the specific amount of people that will be working there on the property. Granted, we cannot regulate, exactly who lives in a unit, but we are doing the best we can up front to ensure that we are only permitting these types of units for this particular use.
And Chair Blau, just to tack on to what Ms. Steele just provided. Yeah, so in the situation where a neighbor believes that a property owner is not using an AED in accordance with the conditions of the permit or in compliance with the code, because in some cases this would be a zoning clearance, so there wouldn't be conditions, they can always file a zoning complaint, and we will investigate whether or not there is an abuse of the permit and whether or not they are in violation, and we would take enforcement actions against the permittee if they were not, in fact, allowing occupants. Well, they were allowing occupants who were not ag employees, and they are not the ones who they are claiming are occupying the unit. So there's always that recourse as well. So,
Commissioner Cooney.
Just a final comment. Trailers have been a problem in neighborhoods for a long time, and there are restrictions. What we're doing, though, in this area with a laudable purpose to try and create more housing is creating, I think, a more intense conflict potential between existing neighbors. And I'm really focusing on Ag 1 properties because there are lots of them, for example, on the South Coast, where they're right mixed in with neighborhood use. And to the extent that renters or others producing income for the property owner have nothing to do with agriculture, I think it's going to occur, and we're going to have to deal with it in the enforcement area. So to the extent that we're aware of the potential, I'm not saying we can't go forward with this ordinance, but I think what we're doing is, and we've done it in other areas, is we're trying one size fits all for these properties to a certain extent, and what applies to the Ag 2 properties throughout the county, and is if we can increase the housing, that's terrific. But now we're trying to go into areas like in the Carpinteria Valley, where there might be an ag use of the property, but the only use of the dwelling is unrelated to the agriculture. So just a concern. It doesn't keep me awake more than a couple of nights.
Commissioner Farini.
To follow on Commissioner Cooney and staff, so I heard 5-year and 1-year reporting. It would seem that to help with this, we would want 1-year reporting, whether that's presentation of W-2s or the ongoing agricultural enterprise, or a combination of both. From the ag user side, you know, we want something that's successful, but we definitely don't want to cause conflict with what Commissioner Cooney's discussing, the Ag 1 mixed in with the urban. So I'm wondering if we could talk about that a little bit more and how to tighten that up.
And I would even go one step farther, and I'm not sure we have to necessarily give them W-2s, but if the property owner were just to certify under penalty of perjury that the property is being used as an agricultural dwelling unit and do that once a year, I'm good with it. I mean, that way if there's an enforcement issue, it's kind of like you're lying to the county and you've done it under penalty of perjury. So it's like, I mean, make it easy to certify it, but just put everybody on notice that you can't do what Commissioner Cooney talked about, which is rent it for a non-agricultural use. I just don't see what's the issue with a 1-page certification. Once a year you do it, and it's real simple.
Yeah, Chair Blau, all good suggestions, and it is an enforcement challenge, no doubt. And it would admittedly be somewhat reactive, but just so we're all clear. So the existing regulations require the reporting once every 5 years. You may change that, you may make the recommendation to the board that they change that. I do want to also emphasize that there are other requirements that we're proposing that are basically carryovers from the existing ordinance. So first of all, upon permitting of an AED, the property owner does have to record and host a property owner document with the chain of title for the property, which indicates, hey, this permit has been issued for an AED, but I can only operate the AED pursuant to the terms of the conditions of that permit for the AED. Second, there is a requirement also in the code, which we're recommending carry over into the proposed amendments, which would basically require if the specific occupant in the unit changes, the property owner needs to notify us and provide us with that information. Just one other thing to keep in mind, if we do have an annual reporting requirement, yeah, you could come up with procedures whereby you can make it pretty simple for property owners. That would be additional work for our permit compliance staff. And there would be a fee associated with that work. So it would be basically the fee for reviewing the documentation, following up, making sure that the property owner does file these forms. Just keep in mind that's one more document that the property owner has to file. People get irritated by that, and I get it. So, but if you believe that it is worthwhile from an enforcement perspective, you may make that recommendation to the board.
Commissioner Perini.
I think that is worthwhile, and I think it's necessary. The other thing we haven't talked about is fines, or how do we go about. So if the property owner is using the dwelling outside of its permitted use, do we do a daily fine? How do we cover this? I understand Chair Blau saying, well, they're going to sign a document saying under perjury, but what's the can we put $500 a day?
Well,
How do you do that?
I think that's problematic if you're not a city, but I think what you can do is to tell them you can revoke their permit for it to be there. They have to remove it. That's going to be the ultimate penalty, I think. If you have a unit on there and you're not using it for agricultural, you have to remove it. Am I correct? And Commissioner Park, you're next. I'll let them answer that question, and then you go.
Yeah, Chair Blau, I just want to make sure we're all clear. When it comes to enforcement, what we're looking for is compliance. We're not looking for retribution. So we go through the progressive enforcement procedures where Once again, it would usually start off with a complaint. We would have to go out and investigate to corroborate that there is in fact a violation. And at that point, we would issue the notice of violation. And the terms of the notice of violation would state, okay, in order to get back into compliance, you must do X, Y, and Z. So we give them a menu of options. So for example, let's say currently the AED is not being occupied by an employee. We'd say within so much time, you need to occupy, you must have this unit occupied by an employee. The existing person needs to be out, and we need to go back and inspect and verify that that is the case. Depending on whether or not they comply, then we go through the enforcement procedures, and then only after we receive non-compliance in response to the notice of violation will we then proceed towards considering, fines or levying the penalties that we're allowed to do pursuant to the state government code. And then that could ultimately lead up to, in the most severe or egregious situation, revocation of the permit. And we'd be taking that back to you and then ultimately the Board of Supervisors on appeal if needed to say, yeah, they just have not cooperated with us. They have not made the efforts to come back into compliance despite all the efforts we've gone through. We believe the permit needs to be revoked. So,
Mr. Park.
Yeah, I'm a little uneasy with adding to enforcement procedures here that are going to create more paperwork for the farmers and a lot more paperwork for planning and development. And I'd ask you, Ms. Steele, could you go back to your slide number 3, the table, and again, just show us how there are more hurdles to jump in order to get this kind of housing on an Ag 1 parcel. And I think that's something for us to remember, that it's going to be less, it's going to be harder to get this kind of housing on Ag 1 parcels. We're less likely to see it. And these problem situations we're imagining, I'm not sure how likely they are. Could you address that on that? I think it's the slide that follows that. There you go. Could you just show us again what's different about the permitting for Ag 1 than Ag 2, which I see as basically Ag 1 requires full-time on-site employment and majority of work to occur, et cetera.
Yeah, Chair Blau and Commissioner Park, you're right. It is going to, there are a few more limitations to getting a permit for an ag employee dwelling on an Ag 1 parcel, but these limitations are in place to address those extra concerns that would come with permitting such a dwelling on an Ag 1 parcel. So first, we have for the zoning clearance and LUP levels in the Ag 1 zone, you would have to have full-time on-site employment for the employees that will be living in the dwelling. And then the extra footnotes beyond that are just to indicate that due to disparities between permit requirements for utilities and AEDs, extra permit may be required for proper utility hookups. And next, if you're proposing between 25 to 34 employees on your Ag 1 zone parcel, it would require a minor conditional use permit, and at least 51% of the work must occur on that site, but some of the work could occur on other parcels as well. And lastly, the CUP level permit does not have any employment location requirements, but it is a CUP subject to discretionary review and conditions. And we do think it might be rare that on an Ag 1 parcel you're going to see a demonstrated need for 35 or more employees, but in case there is a situation where that would exist, we want to provide a permit path for that.
Okay. So do we have any more questions for staff? And is staff done with their presentation? Okay, great. I do have one speaker slip. Claire Wyman.
Hi, good morning. My name is Claire Weinman. I'm the president of the Grower Shipper Association of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. We remain supportive of the Planning Commission's alternative proposal in Table 2, and our priority remains shared housing for individuals, not families, in the Ag 2 zones in particular. there was discussion about the separate definition for the farm worker housing complex, but that requires a conditional use permit in Ag 2, so that's a much higher pathway, much more difficult for people to achieve, and that's why this is important to us as well as something to achieve in the meantime. We hear the challenges that were outlined, but we would argue that they're not insurmountable. And so I think if we go back to, what is the goal that we're trying to accomplish? And I think in terms of it's to make sure that there's adequate water and wastewater available for the occupants. We would argue to maybe defer to the Water Board and Environmental Health for regulatory jurisdiction and definitions of what qualifies as a connection. It seems odd to me, again, just from the outside, that why would a land use permit be the limiting factor for the water and wastewater permitting systems, and I would argue that there's a way that we can address that without the footnotes. For example, maybe one way to accomplish that would be to coordinate more closely with environmental health. You start with your application to environmental health, and then if you get adequate sign-off for your water and wastewater provision, then you would have an accelerated review process through planning and development. And circling back to some of the other discussion, we do want to make sure that there's some link to agricultural employment, that remains, just not the on-site requirement for the Ag 2 parcels. It gets a little bit murky when you're talking about more of a family housing as opposed to individual employees, but we would like to express our support so that there aren't unintended consequences and that it isn't undermining the program. So we thank you for your consideration and look forward to continuing to engage in this process.
Thank you. I'm assuming I have no other speakers. Seeing no one rise, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if we could hear from Environmental Health concerning the issue that Ms. Wyman presented regarding the permitting of the water and wastewater systems.
Good morning, Chair Blau, Planning Commissioners. My name is David Brummond. I'm a supervisor with Environmental Health Services. I supervise what we refer to as our technical services section, which includes our drinking water program and our on-site wastewater program. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have as to how Environmental Health would be interacting with planning and development in the process of ag employee dwellings.
Well, I think the number one question is, in order to hook up one of these temporary, whether it be a park trailer or whatever the housing might be, they have to get a permit from you for both a water connection and for the sewer connection. Am I correct?
That is correct.
And
yes.
you do your normal analysis that you would do for any property.
Chair Blau, members of the Commission, that is correct. The process, our review process remains the same, irrespective of the process for a planning and development permit.
Yeah, the bottom line is you can't hook up a water supply source or create a septic system without your approval.
Chair Blau, members of the Commission, that is correct, yes.
Commissioner Brown, do you have more questions, or is that it?
Well, I guess I'm not familiar with this, so at the lowest level, they come to you, and what kind of permit do you give them? Do you just sign off on them, and then they go and get their zoning clearance? How would this work?
Well, I'm going to assume there'd be two permits. One would be for drinking water, and right. One would be for a disposal of sewage. So each one is a different permit path. And regarding the water system permit for drinking water, there's an application process involved in that, and it would require, depending on the number of connections that it was going to serve, how many dwellings were going to be on the property, how many people would be served on the property, that would dictate the type of permit that would be required and the amount of information that would have to be provided for us to review in order to issue the permit. Some of the permits, again, regarding the number of people or the number of connections, are a county-issued permit, and if it's beyond a certain threshold, then it becomes a state-issued permit. We're a local primacy agency for the State Water Resources Control Board, and if it falls into the category of a public water system, we basically enter to the Water Board, and they have to approve a water permit before we can actually issue it. That's for the drinking water side of things. For septic system, for on-site wastewater sewage disposal, We are again an agent for the Water Quality Control Board. We have a local agency management program that basically lays out program goals and objectives, and we follow those program goals and objectives as closely as we can. And again, that's the size of the on-site system is predicated by the number of employees, which create the wastewater flow, and the system is sized according to that, and it's again predicated on how well the soil can absorb wastewater effluent. So again, depending on the number of people and the number of connections, it would they would get the system sized and engineered appropriately, and we would review that information and issue a permit if we could.
But some of these facilities, particularly for the 1 to 4 employees, may have families with them. So it increases the number of people on site. So with the zoning clearance, it depends upon the number of people who are actually going to be living in the structures projected, I presume, to know how you proceed. Would that require CEQA if they said the structures were large enough for large families, and you've got many people in this one structure where normally you just think, oh, there's just going to be 1 employee. How do you consider all this range of variability?
Chair Blau, Commissioner Brown, that is something they would have to present to us as part of their application. On-site wastewater permit and a water system permit, from our perspective, is a ministerial permit. So if they meet the standards, we issue the permit. As far as if CEQA become involved, again, I think it would depend on where they fall within the planning department's LUDP zoning clearance and how it falls into that permitting tier process.
So you would categorize this as it depends on a lot of factors.
Speaking from experience, it's the size of the system is generally dependent upon the number of plumbing fixtures that you have in the house. And I can tell you from experience that typically you're putting in a system that's 3 to 5 times what's likely to be used in the dwelling. And now I understand that we're in some cases having to put in 2 separate leach line systems in order to be able to switch one over in case it fails. I mean, it's my experience that the wastewater treatment is so redundant and so over-designed that you're never going to have a problem. Do I have that about right, Mr. Brumman?
Chair Blau, members of the commission, that's essentially correct. One correction is on ag zone property over a certain size, you're not required to put in a redundant system. You have to have space available to install a second system should it be necessary, but you're not required to install both systems at the same time.
Right, good. Any further questions for Mr. Brumman? No, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, I will now close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission for, I think, questions and/or deliberations. Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the discussion we've had about enforcement issues. What really, when you're talking about 51% of the work is to be performed in a certain place and not others, you're really in a gray area. And what I think we're doing is consciously and with good motives, we're maybe going a bridge too far in the effort to increase farm worker housing. Recognizing that and recommending to the board nonetheless that we go forward as staff has recommended, I think makes sense. What we are doing though is throwing compliance primarily to the neighbors of the particular parcel. And by experience, we know that the larger parcels are not going to create the problems that are caused in closely knit neighborhoods where a temporary, what would normally be a temporary dwelling is placed, but it's the same for a permanent structure that's built on the place as an ag unit and then doesn't become an ag unit. So we either impose a more regular certification process, which creates problems for compliance staff, or we leave it to the complaint process, which we do in so much of our regulation of housing. And I think Mr. Clement made the point that, you know, yes, people are going to complain when there's a problem. They're not going to complain when there isn't a problem. And while we may be aggravating the workload for our compliance staff, we at least won't be upfront imposing a burden on the ag users who are going to comply. So thinking about it and appreciating the comments of Commissioner Farini, who's closest to the ag use, I'm not going to hold out for a yearly report, but I do think that it's going to create an enforcement burden for our planning and development department.
I'll just weigh in and say, I'm interested with the commissioners. I don't see it being a problem to where the property owner is required to provide a one-page document that says that we're continuing to use this as farm worker housing, or as an employee that's working on the farm. I don't see it being a big problem for the staff. I mean, you simply receive that once a year, you put it in the file, and you're done with it. It shouldn't take more than 15, 20 seconds. I'm just looking at it to be, you know, if you do receive a complaint from someone, you go check the file, and if they've been certifying it and they're lying about it, that's a different issue as opposed to. So, Commissioner Parks, you want to weigh in? Or Mr. Brown, I'm sorry, your light was on.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it's the complexities of the compliance system that sometimes rear its ugly head after we've considered the issues, and I know for staff there is an increased burden of tracking and following and ensuring that however many multiple parcels through many owners, the documentation is received in a timely way and is followed. I see that as a huge compliance conundrum because it's a paperwork shuffle. I think it's probably be more of an issue on some of these smaller Ag 1 parcels, particularly on the south coast, which tend to be along the shore, down on Moore Mesa, where we've got some pretty nice properties there that roll up a trailer, and it's a nice Airbnb spot. Probably less on Ag 2, I'm thinking, because those are more working lands. The others are more recreational lands, or could be. But I'm, all in all, notwithstanding some of the issues that we've discussed today, very supportive and appreciative of staff working with us and coming back with these changes. I'm hopeful that it's helpful to the agriculturalists for their employee needs, their employee housing needs. So I'm supportive of the direction that we're going. Thank you.
Mr. Freeney.
Yeah, I think overall what we've come up with is more helpful than what we started with, and I appreciate staff working with us. It's not quite where we wanted to go, but it is definitely not a simple matter. Initially, I was looking for more differentiation in the Ag 1 and the Ag 2 to set apart for many of the same reasons that Commissioner Cooney was discussing. You know, they're in these more urban areas on the Ag 1, and there's definitely more concern there. I'm a little disappointed that we can't do a 1 year, but I understand the burden that would put on P&D staff. I just think that would go a long way, especially on the Ag 1, to remind people of when they're signing on the dotted line every year that is for Ag employees, Ag-related employees, and not an Airbnb. So maybe when that gets up to the board level, they can decide through funding or something if that's something that they want to do.
So just before Commissioner Park speaks, I just want to clarify Commissioner Farini's position then. If you were making the motion, and I think it's appropriate for you to make the motion, you would be suggesting that we recommend to the board, in addition to what a staff has recommended, that there be added an annual certification process.
That is what I had discussed earlier, but then I think it came back from staff that it'd be such a burden on staff that they weren't recommending that.
Mr. Wilson, you want to comment on that? Or
So
see you grab your mic?
Chair Blau, members of the commission, just something for you to consider on this. In my past life, we did have an annual, in a different jurisdiction, we had an annual renewal. And in that jurisdiction, what we've been whispering across the table is how many do we have out there existing? And so not that we're opposed or have any on the annual thing, there is some variables that we need to consider when you go to an annual. Current ordinance requires a 5-year annual renewal. We're currently in the process of evaluating and aligning our current process to be able to accommodate the existing 5-year renewal process. And what that requires is that every 5 years, a property owner has to come in and provide that documentation. And then there has to be staff there to catch that. So if you switch over to an annual, then that's an annual times how many ag employee dwellings are out there. So if there's thousands, then that is that renewal times 1,000. So in my past life, we had one designated staff person dealing with it. So we had over 1,000 of them, or 2,000. So, and then we had an annual fee. So there's a number of variables I think we need to take into account before we switch over to an annual. And it might be that the recommendation would be for staff to explore fees, staffing, and the program to switch over to an annual renewal program. So that's just something to consider when you're looking at making your recommendation. It could be doable, but I think there's some things that need to be researched if we take that and up there. And does it apply going forward to only the ones that are applied today, or do we capture all the ones that are already existing to switch over to annual? So just for your consideration as you move forward.
And just to help this on annual renewal, what I was about was annual to charge the farmer anything. I don't want him to require to get any approvals. I just year that he does this, and I've been required to renewal. There's approval for it this week, and he uses it for the next 15 years. Once a year, he just notifies me that it's continuing. That's it. No fees, no inspections, no applicants, just annual reporting. And I know we do that on other kind of issues that the planning department has where you do reporting, where you don't have a staff person that monitors it. It's just simply a requirement that goes into the file. So I don't know if that makes a difference. Mr. Cooney, Mr. Park, can you help us a little bit here?
I want to suggest perhaps a little bit different perspective. But first thing I want to say, I think the report, and you did excellent work in responding to our questions and recommendations from the last meeting, and did it in a simple, elegant way, which is always good. And I'm ready to support this just as recommended by staff. But the perspective I'd suggest folks consider is, again, I'm kind of uneasy in the Planning Commission getting into specific enforcement procedures and so forth. I kind of think that's the business of the Planning Development Department to develop for us and suggest. I live on an Ag 1 parcel that's 5 acres in the San Ynez Valley, so I'm just the kind of person that could abuse this by hauling in a park mod. Or I'm just the kind of person that might be annoyed with what my neighbors do, so I understand all that. And I think if you're really concerned about protecting people in Ag 1 zones on small parcels, then why don't you just take the bull by the horns and say, we won't allow ag housing on Ag 1 parcels under 10 acres or something like that. I mean, I just think that's a better way to go than worrying about exactly how to enforce this, and that. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that myself, because I think there might be someone who owns a farming operation and it's mostly Ag 2 parcels, and that they might have 3 or 4 Ag 1 parcels they're working with, and they might have one 5-acre parcel that's used for their headquarters, and they think, well, that's a good place for me to put some ag housing. So I probably would want to see, would not like just a simple prohibition of ag housing on smaller Ag 1 parcels, but I think that's a better way to do it than to continue for us to worry about exactly how to enforce things. That's just my perspective. Thank you.
And just to complicate matters a little further, I just have a little bit of a problem, and I'm going to pose this to Commissioner Farini. The idea that it bothers me that we're talking about permitting process based on the number of employees. Seems to me we don't do that in anything else where we talk about structures. It's usually number of bedrooms, baths, size of it. I mean, let's see, I have a 5,000 square foot building for 4 employees, or I have a 1,000 square foot building for 10 employees. Where's the sense of that when we talk about this chart and what the requirements are, what permit requirements are? You have any concern with that, or so?
Commissioner Brown brought that up early on, I think, about the number of units versus the number of people, and how are we looking at that? So, yeah, as I sit here and I start to calc things out, I see that, most of us are probably going to fall in the LUP process of 5 to 24 employees. There again, somebody on a smaller Ag 1 with maybe a horse operation or something, maybe the 1 to 4 thing works. So it's a tough one, and then I think what I've heard is on the state water system, that's for if you're over 25 people. So there's head counts and there's unit counts. So then what's easiest for staff to me is, well, Farini on his parcel or whoever, he's got a permit for 1 unit, and then 1 unit could be a park model that holds 2, or it could be a double wide that holds 8. It's a tough call on where to go. So we could take a lot more time and continue to go down this path. It's what everybody really has.
No, I just point that out. I think it's an issue. I think for me, I'm good to go with what staff is recommending. And obviously, if it becomes a problem, it'll come back to us at some later date for revision. And I will say that I'm not sure I have the concern about the park model becoming a rental, because the state's now giving you permission to put a secondary residential unit on your 5-acre parcel and rent it out anyway. So, I can't imagine why would you call it a farm worker housing when you don't need to? Just keep it under 1,200 square feet and call it a secondary unit and put it in there. You have no choice. So I'm prepared to move this forward now if we have no other concerns. So Commissioner Farini, if you're ready to make the motion, we'll see where it goes.
Commissioner Blau, if I could add, and perhaps Commissioner Farini may want to include this in the recommendation, from Ms. Weinman's comment, I thought was a helpful suggestion that wasn't really reflected in our table, and I think it addressed at least some level of the concerns about that it's going to be used for an agricultural employee. Adding a footnote to the table, we've already covered it for the Ag 1s in terms of the employment location. In our approach to at least not have those employment locations, one thing that we didn't include, which is part of the existing ordinance, is a requirement even for the Ag 2 that Ag employee is full-time in agriculture. It just doesn't have any reference to on the property or else. So I think just adding that as a footnote even for the Ag 2 that they're full-time in agriculture would be consistent with the current ordinance, and I think it would address some of the other commissioners' concerns.
I'm not sure. I'll defer to Commissioner Farini, but I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think it's necessary that they be full-time on the Ag 2. I mean, what if they're 3/4 time? Does that qualify for a farm worker housing? Mr. Farini, your thoughts?
Well, yeah. I'm not sure where that came from, but for me, it's difficult to say, hey, a guy that's working on the farm 40 hours a week, they came in to do a certain job for us for 6 months or whatever, and then he wants to go work at Carl's Jr.'s on evenings as supplemental income. I don't think that as an employer I have any ability to police that, and then I think I'd be handcuffed in something I wouldn't even know how to deal with. I would be dictating to a person where they can and can't work, and I can see discrimination and everything else. So that would be a nightmare for me, to say you can only work in ag, and then how. I just don't see that I have any, as an employer, any way to ensure that that's actually happening. So I think that would be really, really tough. Unless I'm
And my other problem is, let's say you,
hearing it wrong.
well, my other concern is, let's say you only need that person part-time on your farm, because it's like, let's say you got 4 of them. 3 of them are full-time, 1 of them is half-time. Hey, no. I just, does that qualify? Do you have that situation?
Well, how do I do that? How do I work with an employee on where they are going? It's just not. It's not done.
So you're agreeing with me, we don't need the footnote in there, we don't need the requirement in Ag 2 that we have to, they be full-time on the eggs?
Well, there's no way to handle that.
So I'm agreeing with, should not be added. So now we're ready for your motion.
Okay, you sure you don't want to do this, Commissioner Park? It's mine. Okay. So yes, I move that we follow staff's recommendation. I would also ask that they explore and maybe come back to us on the fees and staffing requirements to include an annual reporting. It's not a renewal of the permit. That would stay on the 5-year that you currently have, but just on an annual report from the ag operator on the use of that farm worker housing unit.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, when you come back, could you give us some idea of the scope? How many people already have in units out there? I mean, is it 20? Is it 20,000? We have no idea. Is it 1,000? I mean, who knows, right? Just to get some idea. Thank you.
Chair Blau, a couple things. Commissioner Brown, sure, no problem. We'll return to that. Just to clarify, our recommendation is for you to direct us to return on July 11th with the resolution, which will include the ordinance amendments which reflect your decision today, and then that would be then presented as the recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. So,
Commissioner Cooney?
I'm seconding.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Mr. Villalobos, if you'll call the roll.
Commissioner Park.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Brown. Chair Blau.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
We'll take a 10-minute break and we'll go to the next item. Thank you. Okay, if you all have a seat, we'll go back on the record. Mr. Villalobos, if you'll read our second item into the record, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Aaron Silva, GPA Consulting, agent for the owner of the California Department of Transportation, to consider case number 617 GPA 3 and 18 RD 4. Applications filed on July 24th, 2017.
Thank you, and good morning, Ms. Harris. You're going to give us a staff report this morning.
Yes, good morning, Chair Blau, members of the Commission. My name is Tess Harris, and I'm the planner for the Highway 101 Local Coastal Program Amendment. I also have Matt Daubertine here with me today. He'll be presenting as well during staff's presentation. And then after the presentation, Greg Hart with SB-CAG is here if you have questions on project delivery or other questions that he might be able to address. So your commission heard this item on May 2nd and directed staff to return with additional information on outreach to the Summerlin community, an analysis of a potential undercrossing at Colville, and a discussion on whether the package of projects could be modified. Your commission also requested a discussion on the Pocket Park, which is along the Via Real Coastal Trail. Just as a reminder, the Local Coastal Program Amendment is being proposed by Caltrans because of wetland policy conflicts that are anticipated to occur in the Carpinteria-Toro Canyon area along the Highway 101 project during the construction. So wetland impacts would be for the Highway 101 project and then the Santa Claus Lane Bikeway and Streetscape projects. So we'll start with outreach meetings, which your commission had requested we come back with. Staff did conduct an additional outreach meeting with the Summerlin community during a Summerlin Citizens Association meeting on May 30th. SB-CAG and Public Works staff presented some items, including Evans Avenue, the options for Evans Avenue, which we'll briefly mention today, as well as a feasibility analysis for the Colville Tunnel to the beach. And then there were many members of the Summerlin community at the meeting that expressed generally support on the upgrades to Evans Avenue. And during the meeting, the public was divided in their viewpoints on the Colville Street undercrossing and whether it should be built. Then in addition to the outreach meeting last month, there have been multiple meetings that have occurred for the Highway 101 project over the past, over many years. Between Caltrans and the Summerlin Citizens Association, for example, there were about 10 meetings that occurred from 2009 to 2012. There were additional meetings for the environmental impact report and then meetings in Montecito as well as Summerlin and Carpinteria. Then meetings beyond those where Caltrans was present occurred as well with SB-CAG and Public Works staff throughout the entire process. This slide just shows you the current beach access in the Summerlin community on Evans Avenue and at Padaro Lane. So the yellow stars are where the beach access exists currently. And then the orange star shows you where Colville Street is located, where we were looking at the feasibility of potentially having a tunnel at Colville. So from Evans Avenue to Padaro Lane, it's about 6,000 feet or just a little bit over a mile distance. And then from Evans Avenue to Colville Street, it's about 850 feet. It's 2 blocks from the 2 streets. And then this slide shows you the Evans Avenue undercrossing options that during the Summerlin Citizens Association meeting staff presented. There's a variety, these options all show a variety of options. So they have pedestrian paths, bike paths, and then paths for cars as well. In option 3, there's an area for parked cars. The other options do not have that in those options. And I'll turn it over to Matt at this point if he wants to discuss anything more about Evans Avenue, and then he will go into the Colville undercrossing as well. Yep.
Chairman Blau, members of the commission, good morning. My name is Matt Daubertine. I'm with Santa Barbara County Public Works. Really appreciate your time on this item today. So in talking with the Coastal Commission about these options, they were open to either having the parking remain under the overpass or not. It was up to the preferences of the Summerlin community. And they said, because of the additional parking that you're getting on Wallace, whatever really works best for the community in terms of access. Maybe the businesses would like parking down there, maybe they wouldn't. There is a perception by some members of the community that the parking leads to unsavory characters being there at night. And there's some in the community that's observed that pedestrian and bicycle access would be further facilitated by the removal of parking, because it just kind of gets a lot of the clutter and a lot of the a lot of the cars out of the way, so that people can see the traffic and see what's going on underneath there. And so we've got options that the Summerlin community can weigh in on and help us choose the right project to meet their needs. In addition to just the geometrics and the configurations of pedestrian access, bicycles, vehicle lanes, and parking or no parking, you also have elements of public art that can be added, landscaping, night lighting, and basically make it a proper gateway facility for Summerlin. And this is something that we're also going to be doing at the South Padaro interchange due to the replacement of that facility. And so these are two areas that we can really enhance the connectivity and the coastal access for the public. Should we go to the tunnel now? Okay. So at your direction, we went away and we analyzed in sort of a concept engineering analysis the feasibility of the Colville Tunnel. As you may recall, there was great interest expressed at your last hearing about what would be the feasibility and the sort of design challenges associated with this facility. What we learned is, from a construction standpoint, it's not that difficult to build. For example, the grade difference that you have to deal with on the Colville side, on the Summerlin side, of the tunnel entrance, it's about a 4-foot drop to get people down. So that limits the length and the extent of the ADA ramps that you would need to be able to get people down and entered into the mouth of the tunnel. You would then have about a 200-foot reach through the tunnel to get to the other side. Because the highway is going to be widened to the median, that would eliminate any daylighting of the tunnel. So it would be 200 feet long. It would be a box culvert style, 8 foot by 8 foot, which is identical to the construction of the Butterfly Beach tunnel in Montecito. The Butterfly Beach tunnel is about 150 feet, and I'm a slow walker, and it took me about 45 seconds to get through it. So you can think about this tunnel would take you about a minute to walk through it in an 8 by 8, and it would be lit, of course, just with electrical lighting as opposed to any kind of day lighting or ventilation that you would get through the center of it. Looking at the path of travel, it's about 1,050 feet to go through the tunnel and then down to Lookout Park, and it's about 1,100 feet, difference of 50 feet, about 1,100 feet if you were to just walk down Lilly Avenue to Evans Avenue to reach the park. What we also learned in just kind of looking at the path of travel for pedestrians, should the tunnel not be constructed, you would be looking at a pedestrian crossing Lilly Avenue, say at Colville, being on the ocean side of Lilly, walking all the way down to Evans Avenue, and then if you stay on the east side of Evans Avenue, you stay out of the way of that southbound off-ramp. The southbound off-ramp's on the opposite side of Evans Avenue. You'd just simply be crossing Wallace Avenue and entering into the park. Where we found at least some challenges on the cost side is the cost estimate came in at $4.6 million. And that, to us, struck us as a fairly steep financial hurdle to build a $4.6 million tunnel approximately 850 feet away from an existing coastal access. And when we were talking to representatives of the Coastal Commission and kind of thinking about what are the statewide priorities for funds that would build something like this, the focus is typically on communities that don't have any public access to the beach, that they don't have any opportunities to be able to access a nearby beach facility. That's where the resources are typically focused. It would be a tough challenge to try and raise public funds for a facility like this, and we would continue to look and see what opportunities would be out there. but it presented a fairly significant challenge to the feasibility of this facility.
I have one question for you. When I saw that, explain to me what $1 million in project development costs are. I mean, when I saw that one, like, what is that?
Chair Blau, Fred Luna with SBCAG. I coordinated the effort through our consultant team working with the county staff. So those are the costs related to getting the project, which you have to recognize this project is initially starting, it's an idea, and then, as Matt mentioned, it's now in concept. So we've looked at some alignment studies. So getting it through an environmental process, getting it through design, paying for the construction administration as a separate project. So typically you're in the South Coast, you're looking maybe at 30 to 40% of the capital cost just to get it through.
Okay, thanks.
Then just to complete the discussion of Chair Blau, members of the commission, in talking with Caltrans, they indicated that while, again, in looking at the construction feasibility, it's generally buildable, they warn that maintenance of these facilities is not a high priority for them, and that they have had concerns throughout the state regarding safety and security of these facilities, and that they most recently had to close one of the tunnels underneath the freeway in Monterey due to ongoing public safety problems that were happening at that facility. So in general, the agency is not enthusiastic about constructing additional tunnel facilities underneath their freeways. I think that concludes what we wanted to share on what we learned about this facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of staff from the commission?
Chair Blau, I do still have a little bit more of a presentation,
Okay,
if you don't
great.
mind.
Thought you were done.
Chair Blau, members of the commission. So I'll move on to one of the questions that you had asked of staff during the last hearing was the ability for your commission to modify the policy language as well as the package of projects that's before you today. And so staff met and spoke with Coastal Commission multiple times in May after our May 2nd hearing regarding this project and whether the Coastal Commission would be amenable to changes to the policy language or the package of projects. And we had included showed the Coastal Commission language regarding exchanging coastal development permit projects if an alternative project had a similar benefit. And the Coastal Commission staff indicated that they were not supportive of changes to the proposed language that would allow projects to be exchanged, and that the package as currently drafted provides a guarantee that these projects would be constructed. And so really they were looking at a guarantee that the projects that are in the local coastal program amendment are the projects that will be moving forward. Then further, SB1 funding for phases 4B and 4C is an item to consider. It includes the package of projects as part of the local coastal program amendment, and Santa Barbara County received $184 million in funding from SB1 for construction of the highway and segments 4B and 4C, the balancing projects and coastal development projects. And so that's little over $30 million just for those other projects associated with the highway. And then at this time, there's no funding available to add additional projects since that funding cycle has already closed. And the expectation is that we deliver on the projects that we received funding for. The balancing and coastal development permit projects in the amendment do provide significant coastal access and recreation benefits, including new upgrades to bikeways, pedestrian paths, both new paths and upgrades to existing paths, and then streetscape improvements, trail signage, and sidewalk extensions, as well as undercrossing enhancements. So with these factors, staff recommends that the package of projects as proposed for the local coastal program amendment remain, including the language before you today. Then I'll turn it back over to Matt to talk about the Pocket Park and the trail for beach connection to Loon Point.
Chairman Blau, members of the commission, one of the issues that also we wanted to discuss with the Summerlin community, and then also bring back to your commission today, was to clarify exactly what this proposal entails. So starting with the trail itself, it's a spatially, physically separated Class 1 bike path, also called a multi-use trail, on the ocean side of Via Real. It would enable people who are perhaps more cautious about riding in traffic, riding on a Class 2 bike lane, to have a separated facility where they could leave the sidewalks of Summerlin, which end at Greenwell, and then continue on to Loon Point on a safe facility. The pocket park at the end was a concept that we sort of discovered in the field, thinking that it would be a nice place to perhaps pause and enjoy some very nice ocean views. Think like maybe a couple of picnic tables and a bench, and that's it. So this isn't a large-scale facility. This doesn't have elaborate playground facilities or anything like that. It's just a place where you could perhaps pause. One of the things to consider in thinking about the totality of the package of improvements that are in front of you is the challenge that the Coastal Commission gave us was to finish the California Coastal Trail. And that's what we're doing. We are, to the extent feasible, finishing all of the remaining missing links from the Ventura County line all the way to the city of Santa Barbara. And so what you're going to get is additional sort of cyclists, additional people traveling through our area, enjoying the South Coast and enjoying what are world-class cycling facilities, and passing along through the area. So they're going to be passing through the downtown Summerlin area, perhaps stopping for a break, perhaps stopping for sandwiches and, gearing up. And then this would be a place where you could pause and enjoy the ocean and enjoy a little bite to eat. That's the thinking behind this. Caltrans is supportive in concept of this. There's some questions that they need to answer regarding just building something adjacent to a state facility. That's the process that they always go through. But that's what we were thinking. There's a couple picnic tables and leave it at that. And then you would, from the interchange at North Padaro, you would then travel on to Loon Point via a new sidewalk that would be built from the southern end of the North Padaro interchange all the way down to the park. I think that's what we wanted to cover.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Could you just put that lights? Right. Is along here, is the little trail, is it at the same elevation as the freeway? Is it lower? Is it higher? I don't.
Yes, Chairman Blau, Commissioner Brown. So Via Real at this portion is elevated above the freeway, and the more you leave Summerlin and the more you head towards the North Padaro interchange, it gets a little higher and a little higher.
Okay.
And so there's a slope that leads down to the freeway, and the pathway is proposed to be up adjacent to Via Real, to again enjoy the views and also be a little above the noise, frankly.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
Mr. Park.
I didn't want to interrupt the report. Are you done with your report or your presentation? If you're not, I'll wait until you are.
Commissioner Park, through the chair, there's one more slide.
I'm gonna.
After that, I'll be done. So with that, the local coastal program amendment protects and enhances coastal access and coastal resources, and staff recommends that your commission take staff's recommended actions as stated in the staff report dated April 12th, along with the additional information that was provided to you in the June 1st memorandum. So make the findings for approval of the project, determine that the project is exempt from CEQA, and recommend that the board also determine that the project is exempt. Adopt a resolution recommending that the Board of Supervisors approve case number 17 GPA 3, an amendment to the coastal land use plan. And then adopt a resolution recommending that the Board of Supervisors approve case 18 ORD 4, an ordinance amending Article 2 to establish the Transportation Corridor Wetland Overlay District. So with that, that concludes staff's presentation. We're available to answer questions as well.
Mr. Park.
And just one clarification. Greg Hart with SBCAG is also here, and I believe he wants to add something as well to staff's presentation, or shortly after you have questions.
Actually, let's hear from the gentleman first, and we'll ask questions then.
Chair Blau and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to talk. We have been working very carefully with your staff for quite some time, and the community as well, over a very long period of time. This is not an easy project to deliver. It is the largest transportation project ever proposed in Santa Barbara County, and it is a regional traffic mitigation project. It's not something that you or us typically work on, to be honest with you. This is a very large undertaking, and SBCAG and Caltrans have been in partnership for a very long time to try and bring these projects forward. So to meet the interest and the needs of the community, we have been working collaboratively with your staff and everybody involved to try and figure out a package of additions to the project that would make it even more palatable for the community. And these are not the primary purpose of this project. This project is the carpool lane on Highway 101 that has been promised to Santa Barbara County residents for nearly 30 years now, and the voters have voted to tax themselves to build this project and make this happen. We're very fortunate that the state of California has passed the gas tax last year, and there is a funding path now to make this project happen. In addition to the funding for the actual highway widening project, that gas tax revenues now provide grant funding to make it possible to do all of the projects that we're talking about. Some additional $50 million in really vital, critical bicycle pedestrian improvements that we're all excited about doing. We have a challenge with the funding that's coming from the state to make these projects happen and the timing that comes with those funds. You know, we had to apply for these dollars at the beginning of this year. The California Transportation Commission just recently awarded the entire grant application that we received. Our region received more money per capita than any other place in the state of California, and we did not include funding for this additional amenity as part of that package. So we don't have a path to pay for the additional tunnel. That doesn't mean that it isn't possible to do it, but it does put time pressures on us to deliver that project. We would love to have more time to work with the community, to work with your staff. I think you will hear from the community that there's wide variety of opinion about this amenity. And that has been consistent through the whole dialogue that we've been having with the community. We've had a very hard time coming to a consensus within the Summerlin community about what this ought to be. And so it feels as though there does need to be more time to discuss that. And the challenge for us is that linking this project to the local coastal plan amendment that is critical to move forward the project that there isn't division about, that there is a consensus about, that there is a funding time clock attached to, presents a problem, and it's a challenge for us. And I just want you to know that and understand that, and I hope you can appreciate that. If there's a way that we can, work this out collectively together, we're open to considering that. But it is a real-world challenge in this situation for you and for us to work together on this. And I'll answer any questions if you have.
Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
Like you, I was at the meeting on the 30th and found it to be about as positive an exercise in democratic consideration of an important issue as I've seen in my 14 years on the commission. And I agree with your statement that this needs more time. You said it feels like it needs more time. Well, it does. And so what I'd like to pin down with you is exactly what is our time as a planning commission and a county with respect to this issue. Because even if there was another month, I feel like the community could take all the good ideas that are on the table, all the concern that really the decision points have only been shared with them to have input on recently. If we could buy some more time in the process, it would be beneficial for everybody, and the end product would be greatly supported.
Well, I think from our perspective, the best path would be to separate this proposal from the LCPA amendment and treat it as a separate and parallel project. We have precedent for that. There are other projects in that situation that have been working to catch up with the 101 HOV project. And so if we considered it in that context and said, this project is a standalone project that needs to move through a deliberative community planning process, do the engineering and the planning necessary to make everyone confident that this is something that the community wants, we will commit to doing our very best to try and find a funding source for that in the future as other opportunities provide. But that would allow us to move forward with the 101 HOV project, have no delays associated with that, no risk to the state funding that comes for those elements that have been funded, and still allow this to work its way through a process that I think the community would appreciate and I think you would appreciate. But the idea of linking this through the LCPA amendment at this point is frankly very challenging. It just presents uncertainty for the larger project. We don't want to be in a position where, for whatever reason, this is difficult to deliver, the community doesn't want it, and yet we have a condition in your local coastal plan amendment that says it has to be done, and we're all frustrated.
Just to narrow down the area of concern, I recognize there's a great deal of division about whether 4.6 or 5.6 or $2.5 million should be spent on additional access to the beach. Coastal plan and everything in the Summerlin plan says we have to do as much as we can to connect access to the beach to the community. So those are all laudable purposes, but I don't want my concern to be limited to whether a tunnel, as has been preliminarily studied, is the right solution. So I'm really looking at the rest of the package. And if I understand correctly, you want to take what's on the table now, what the Coastal Commission has approved, and tie that to the LCP approval and move that down the track. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Your staff recommendation puts all of those improvements into the package that we would accept and include in the LCPA, and we have funding to deliver those projects.
Yeah, and my concern is the community hasn't had enough opportunity for input on that. It was decided a lot by staff. I'm not saying it wasn't discussed thoroughly. Maybe it was even reported at various times to the community, here's what we're thinking about. But in terms of saying, gosh, wouldn't it be better to do this to Lily Avenue, or you know, address the parking in another way by accessing a parking area for employees? There are worlds of good ideas that have been brought out just recently, since the hearing and during the hearing. So if I get what you're suggesting and what staff is recommending, let's keep talking about that. But as far as getting approval for what we've already agreed to among staff, at least, we should do that and not try and go back over the multimodal bike path or the pocket park or the extra parking on Wallace, which some assert is way more than is needed. Those things are going to close up into a bag and go along with the LCP amendment at this time.
Yes, I think that is your staff recommendation. That is our preference. That does not mean that there will not be additional conversation with the community about the details of those projects. They all require a local coastal permit for them, and so we will be back to you at a future point to be able to have resolution of additional details. You know, we're at the 40,000 foot level here with the local coastal plan amendment. Both this segment of the highway and the next segment of the highway that will be in Montecito and not in Santa Barbara for your jurisdiction, but for the city of Santa Barbara's, will also need to be coming back for permits. So that there's quite a bit of time to build and construct and resolve all of these things, but we do have an immediate time crunch where we got the state funding and the clock is now beginning for us to deliver that, and we're concerned that the extra time at the end of the process that will resolve all of these issues will help us then, but it's hurting us potentially now. And we are committed to continue this dialogue. As you saw from the chart, you know, I personally have been involved in all of those meetings back to 2008 or so, and we want this to work out for everybody. That's our goal.
So I'm posing to you the possibility, the likelihood that you'll be sitting in judgment of some of these issues in a few months. And so you're wearing, in a sense, not only the hat you have on now with SBCAG, but a theoretical hat as a member of the Board of Supervisors. And, you know, these alternatives, the projects, what's good for Summerlin is a really good discussion that's been started by this process. And I don't want to lose sight of that momentum and consider these other things. What is the possibility that despite all our efforts, the Commission agrees, the Board of Supervisors agrees that these offsets of the environmental concerns down the highway go along with the local coastal plan amendment and are eventually not funded because the funding isn't sufficient to do everything else? I don't want to build an expectation on the part of the Summerlin portion here that we're at least going to get a good bike path through Summerlin. We're at least going to get some enhancements to Evans Avenue, and then find out 6 months or a year from now that, gosh, we ran out of money, and you know, we're willing to give you a coat of paint at Evans Avenue, but that's all we have left.
Well, I can assure everybody in the room that we're at the stage now with the funding from the state that is certain, and that prospect of us not having the funding to deliver those projects is very low. But it is not zero, unfortunately, because of the ballot measure that's going to be on the ballot this November, where California voters will decide whether or not to repeal the state gas tax increase. That is a game changer for all of the things, not just the amenities and the bicycle facilities, but for the highway project itself. You know, we do not have the money to be able to locally fund the highway improvements. We need state and federal dollars to do that, and that is where that funding is coming directly from the gas tax increase. So if in the worst case scenario the voters were to decide to repeal that tax, the grant funds that we were allocated will go away, and we will all be back at ground zero and have to start all over again. So that is why the California Transportation Commission has created a sense of urgency in their process, is to get these projects going as fast as possible, to demonstrate to the voters that there's a reason to have a gas tax, that there are projects that are coming online for every community in the state of California, and that the funding for that is critical to making all this happen. So I can't stand here and say with certainty this will all happen. If the gas tax is repealed, I can't say that, but if it is not repealed, the California Transportation Commission has granted the funds to pay for all of the amenities that are included in the local coastal plan amendment that your staff is recommending that we support as well. The only difference is the question about this additional pedestrian tunnel.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Park.
I have some questions of Ms. Harris, so you can take a seat, and thank you. I'm going to sacrifice myself and ask dumb questions that probably everybody else is thinking about but doesn't want to voice. So I'm going to ask a general question and then a specific question. When I look at the recommended actions, number 1, make the findings for approval of the project, I am confused about what the project is. When I read the staff report, or I did in the last hearing, I thought we were focusing here at the Planning Commission. My role at the Planning Commission is not to come up with money for these projects or to have a beauty contest, which one I like best. It's to do what we're supposed to do. And I thought our job here was to consider an LCP amendment. And in this dialogue between Mr. Hart and Commissioner Cooney, I heard the word project used in about 4 or 5 different meanings. You know, is the project this potential Colville underpass? Is the project all of the mitigations for the freeway widening? Is the project just the LCP amendment? I don't even understand. What is the project that's here? What are you asking us to do? How's that for a dumb question?
Commissioner Park, through the chair. So the project is the local coastal program amendment. And what that means is it's an amendment to the policy language, to the coastal land use plan, as well as to Article 2, the coastal zoning ordinance. The reason behind the amendment or the change in policy is because of the Highway 101 expansion project that's anticipated to come through Santa Barbara County. And with the expansion project, there are wetland impacts in the Carpinteria and Toro Canyon area specifically. that currently don't quite follow the policy. So we have a policy 9-9 in our coastal land use plan that says that projects or development shall not occur within 100 feet of wetlands. So with this highway expansion, some wetlands or wetland buffer areas will encroach into the 100-foot buffer. So for these very limited projects, we are amending the coastal land use plan as well as Article 2 to provide standards so that when those future projects like the highway expansion project and then the balancing and coastal development permit projects that are listed, when those come back to your commission, to staff through an application, that that those projects then are following the development standards that are before you today. So you're looking at the policy with these future projects will come before you, but right now the Planning Commission is reviewing the coastal land use plan policy and the Article 2, the changes to the coastal zoning ordinance. Then within both of those, actually, the list of balancing and coastal development permit projects have been identified as projects that would balance the wetland impact and on balance provide the most protection to coastal resources.
So let me follow up with my specific question, because I guess I did understand this correctly, that we're not here at the Planning Commission to decide how to fund potential projects in the future. That's not what we've been asked to do. That's not our job. We're not here to look at the package of projects that have been presented and say we like this one and don't like this one and so on and so forth. That's not our project. Our project is to look at this LCP amendment that allows these things to occur. And the last time we heard this, I made a suggestion, which you've responded to in the staff report. My suggestion was, well, given that we may see some future funding and some future discussion and future public hearings about other things like this Colville underpass, let's make sure this LCP amendment maybe has some catch-all phrase that allows that in the future. And you responded that in the staff report in a way that I actually don't understand, and I wonder. In fact, before the hearing, I identified that with a marker, and could you perhaps read that and explain it to me? Because it was talking about exchange of projects. What I was more concerned about is if something came up in the future. So I'm not kicking out a project you have now and saying do the Colville underpass now. But if something came up in the future, more money, more something, that at least our LCP amendment encompasses that. But you responded, now explain your response.
Commissioner Park, through the chair. So the sentence, I believe that the question is coming from as the Coastal Commission staff indicated that they would not be supportive of language that allows an exchange of balancing projects or coastal development permit projects with other projects that have not been identified in the local coastal program amendment. And so with that, we had a phone call with the Coastal Commission staff and then a subsequent meeting in May and talked about adding language to policy 7-32 that would state the following project shall be required to enhance coastal access and non-motorized travel within the corridor. That's the language that's before you today. And then the language that we discussed with the Coastal Commission was, but shall not preclude the exchange of coastal development permit projects if it's determined that the alternative project achieves a benefit that is equal to or greater than the listed project. And that language was language that the Coastal Commission had concerns about, with including language that would allow for an exchange of projects. It provides an uncertainty that of what project will ultimately be delivered, and the Coastal Commission wants assurance that the projects that they have heard that Caltrans has proposed will actually be delivered when the Highway 101 project comes before you. With that said, there's also staff's proposed the Coastal Land Use Plan Policy 7-33. That's a general policy that talks about additional alternative transportation projects, not tied necessarily to the Highway the phasing of 4B and 4C, but it does say that the Highway 101 expansion shall not, it shall provide a benefit to alternative transportation. And further, it shall not change existing pedestrian or bike paths without providing as good or greater pedestrian and bike paths.
So the reference to CLUP policy 733, is that a reference to an existing policy, or is this a suggested, is this a proposal to add that?
Commissioner Park, through the chair, policy 7-33 is proposed. So it's staff's proposed language to add that policy, and the Coastal Commission staff was supportive of having that policy in our coastal land use plan.
Well, then I think that's exactly what I had in mind, and I appreciate that response. I think that adds that flexibility for something in the future, and I think that's something good for us commission members to realize, and everybody in the audience, that this isn't the end of these projects. We're just trying to get an LCP that allows things in the future, and perhaps there'll be future funding that'll provide for those. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Ms. Harris, since we're looking at the 40,000 foot level, we're seeing here all the various options, and particularly of the Evans Avenue undercrossing. So I'm assuming that at some point in the future you're coming back with more detail about which one. Okay. And there'll be a public process for that. And okay, thank you. And even the Wallace Avenue, in terms of, since we have public comment here that it's a parking lot, we don't totally need all that, and blah, blah, blah. So can you maybe speak to that one, that issue too?
Commissioner Brown, through the chair, all the projects that are balancing and coastal development permit projects would come back. They would go through a public process, just like any project that comes in with an application.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I see we have no more lights on for questions from commissioners, so I'll now go to public comment. Before I start, I just want to point out that Commissioner Park, as he clearly understands that this is not us deciding on which projects we're going to do, whether we do a tunnel, whether we do the park. All those things are to be decided later. All they're doing now is changing the language that primarily talks about the wetlands issue. This is going forward. So although I'm not going to ask you to sit down if you talk about the tunnel and the parks and other things that aren't before us today, I caution you, it is kind of a waste of time, that we're not here to decide that today, that's going to come back later. And I can assure you, with Commissioner Cooney being in the 1st District, you're going to see lots of community meetings that talk about those various parts of the a project, and you'll get a chance to help decide which ones we do and how we do them. So having said that, the first speaker I have is Hillary Hauser, followed by Norma Hurley.
Chairman Blow, Commissioners, Hillary Hauser from Heal the Ocean. I had all these things to say, but after listening to the conversation between the commission and the staff, there really is nothing to say about the individual projects. I can see that. But I will just say this. I do know from our work on the Rincon septic to sewer project that took us 15 years because it went right, left, center, because of just things that you trip over. Grant and timing on those things are really important. We tripped over Caltrans. I can't imagine anything being built under the freeway without their permit, and they wouldn't even permit a sewer pipe along a frontage road down the 101. So those issues, I think we don't want to lose the opportunity for the grant. The Coastal Commission approval is very valuable. The EIR process is very valuable. So I think approving this amendment today is crucial, and we should proceed with
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Norma Hurley, followed by Michael Hurley. Sure.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for hearing us today. We are residents of Summerlin, and to be brief, We basically are supportive of the beautifying the Evans Avenue entrance, beautifying the Lookout Park, possibly the picnic area up in Padaro, but we're opposed to the tunnel underneath Colville, or the Colville tunnel underneath the 101. We're afraid it'll be dangerous for people coming out the Wallace end, which is now an on-ramp onto the 101 with no markings for speed limit, so people can drive whatever speed they want to, and we're questioning how pedestrians can come out of that and be safe in that environment. So that's just one, aside from what could happen after hours in an underground environment and what the lighting pollution, if I may, could be on the city side and or on the Wallace Avenue side for residents on that end. So that's all I have to say, and this is my wife, Nora.
Hello. I would say we are for the proposals that have been submitted, excluding the tunnel, any question about the tunnel at this point, but after hearing what has been said today, we're for passing the proposed amendments that are on the table that you're considering today.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne Perkins, followed by Susie Cathay.
Chair Blau, if I could interrupt for a second.
Sure.
There's one item that we just want to clarify the record in that the action before the Planning Commission today is as stated by Chair Blau and Commissioner Park, that the action is the policy amendment, the LCP amendment. Just a matter of clarification, that LCP amendment does contain a list of projects that has been identified by Caltrans with concurrence with the Coastal Commission as being delivered. So that's how those two items fit together. So the item before the Commission is the LCP amendment. So the Commission is not approving or disapproving those projects. They're just identified as projects that Caltrans has identified as being committed to accomplishing.
Right.
But the action is the LCP amendment.
And the exact design, the exact implementation, which ones are selected are yet to be determined, both by public comment and by this commission when it comes back before us. Do I have that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, mostly. As far as specific designs and specifications, that is yet to be determined, and that's something that we would see later down the road. As far as which projects would be bundled together, this LCPA does establish that list of projects. So by adopting this LCP amendment, we are setting the stage for the bundle of projects that Caltrans would be committing to as part of their overall construction efforts. So I don't want to give the false impression that that there's still a lot of flexibility as to which of these projects would be delivered down the road. Caltrans would, through this LCPA, be committing to delivering these projects. Their final design and look, there's still opportunities for work in that regard, but there is not the availability for Caltrans to decide, oh, well, we'll do a different project instead, or we're not going to follow through on some of the ones identified in this list.
Thank you. Ms. Perkins, go.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Suzanne Perkins. I'm First District Park Commissioner, although I'm here today to represent myself. I've been on the Parks Commission for 25 years, so I have a lot of background in District 1 and the different issues that will probably be coming up with some of these. I'm glad you staff clarified this because I think it's important that the community know that these are the projects that staff and Caltrans and SBCAG have recommended, and these are the projects that they will be considering, and not other projects. I assume from the clarification that that's correct. So, although I don't really want to spend any time talking about the different projects, I think there are several that are proposed that are not realistic. And one of them is the underpass. It comes out at Wallace Avenue. How is the public going to get across the railroad tracks? There's no railroad easement, and as the Planning Commission, you know what the county has gone through at Santa Claus Lane to try to get an easement across a heavily used beach and railroad tracks. And we still are not successful at getting that done. And I'm on the Parks Commission. I think we've been working on that 15, 20 years, and we still don't have an easement. So how can we dump the public out at the railroad tracks and not expect them to cross the railroad tracks? Then they get to Finney Avenue. There's no public access from Finney Avenue to the beach. So you're putting in a tunnel that goes nowhere and drops people out on a busy road, Wallace, no easement across the railroad tracks, and no method to get down to the beach. To me, that's absolutely insane to be considering that. I'd like to go to the lookout proposed at Padero Lane. Padero Lane and Lambert Road and Greenwell are one of our most heavily used equestrian areas. We have an equestrian trail at Padero Lane, and the possibility of widening the road and making the bike path wider is really going to disrupt. We spent a lot of time over the years and getting a trail put in from the south side of the north side, of Villa Real, to help, because we were having accidents because polo ponies and people are riding across the bridge. I'm just afraid, and rightly so since I'm an equestrian, that putting in a bike path there is going to complicate and make things more difficult. So I think that a lot of time needs to be spent. I'm meeting with Matt and Parks Department this week on site to talk about it, because that is a really important area, and I'm getting blinked, so I guess I better shut up.
Okay, thanks. Susie Cathon, followed by Andy Newman.
Good morning, or almost afternoon, Chair Blau and Commissioners. And first of all, I want to, my name is Susie Cawthon. I am Summerlin's representative. I was appointed by Supervisor Williams' office to the DRT, Design Review Team for the 101. So I have that hat. I'm also on the board of the Summerlin Citizens Association. And I want to first of all thank you so much for what you did last month, because you allowed us to actually come together for the first time as a community, really knowing, oh my gosh, we were told in November we had a lot of time on this and not to worry. And of course, a lot of things happened in our county during the interim time, and then suddenly we were handed this package, and this was it. And we thought, well, we haven't had time to say, do we want this? Do we not want this? I have my tennis shoes on today because I did teach class, but also if you are at the east end of Summerlin, to get to Evans and to get back, it is torture. Tess, can I ask you if you'll put your first slide up that has the proposed, and I want to apologize to this commission as well, because I was the one who said, what about Colville? Just because I knew they were an easement, because I'm on the fire board and it's adjacent to our property. And so everybody took me literally and looked at just Colville. But that wasn't the best idea. So I want to thank Fred Luna of SESB-CAG, came out yesterday, put his tennis shoes on, and went for a walk with me. And we walked down Wallace and we walked down Lily. And what we found was at Temple, Scott, I know you're shaking your head going, Susie, hush. But at Temple, which is at the end of Finney, right before everybody zooms to get on the freeway, leaving lots of room for the on-ramp, there is already a railroad crossing. There is, can somebody point out Temple for me? We are at the east end of our community. It is in the middle, because we were told at our meeting, okay, this 850 feet, it's too close on Evans. And I said, well, if you told me that, let's look at these other alternatives. I've also learned so much in the last month, but in terms of the elevation, there's ample room to get our 5% grade for ADA. We get people just moving down to the beach. And here's the beauty, our Finney residents, we found at our community meeting, said, oh, no, we don't want this coming out right in the middle and where people are speeding, or they might try to go through our private property to get to the ocean. Well, this Temple exit comes out right where there is already a railroad crossing, just like there is at Evans, and there's an intersection. There's an opportunity to actually put a stop sign there so that it slows down the traffic on Finney where everybody's going, and it should be 30 miles an hour in a residential area. So, and Middle Beach is an access, and I would love for you to come and put your tennis shoes on and walk with me to see how this is a beautiful win-win. And I want to thank Fred for his time, because I'm learning so much about the considerations that SBCAG and that Caltrans has to take into consideration. But this hasn't been looked at. We didn't have time. It needs to be thoroughly researched. We need more time. And I am aware, and that's been our concern, that this package of projects, it was bam, bam, here. These are your projects. And I have concerns. I'm a big proponent of the changes to the park, but I'm not sure that those funds really can be spent on the park. Is that a viable spend of these dollars? Couldn't we use them for an undercrossing?
Thank you.
Let's keep working. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Newman, followed by Marion Carver. Graver, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Andy Newman, Chairman Blau and Commissioners. Thank you, first of all, for extending this at your last meeting. And as our previous speaker just mentioned, it was a terrific meeting we had at the Summerlin Citizen Association. And when I was there, I was so impressed at the quality and talent of the people that came forth. And I think what I would like to see happen, there's a willingness, to have a committee and to hopefully sit down with county staff, roll up our sleeves, and discuss all these options and all the designs. Mr. Hart, you said you've been working with the community. I wonder if you mean the greater Santa Barbara community and not the Summerlin community, because rightfully or wrongfully, we feel like we haven't been consulted. You've shown up and presented plans that we had nothing to do with. We feel, I'm using harsh words here, excuse me, that these are being shoved down our throat. In fact, I totally understand with the catastrophes of the fire and the flood that county staff has been under tremendous pressure, and rightfully so, to pay attention elsewhere. But we feel like we haven't been included. I'm confused about the Coastal Commission and all these things. What I understand is there a lot of suggestions have been brought up that aren't on this list, and from what I understand, the Coastal Commission is not going to consider amending the list. So again, I am so impressed with Commissioner Cooney's ability to listen to us, to articulate our concerns, and I appreciate that so much. And I just hope we can have more time and that we can all work together. I mean, that meeting, I've owned property where I live for 45 years. Never have I seen a meeting of that quality, and it was democracy at work, and I hope you'll give us the opportunity for that process to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Marion Craver, followed by Ted Craver.
It's still morning. Good morning. I'm Marion Craver. I'm a property owner with my husband, obviously, on Finney Street East. And I want to just thank the staff for all the work they have done. It's just a tremendous effort to get this to us, although we just saw it for the first time last week. I just want to go on record that I am very much against the Colville Tunnel. It's 850 feet away from Evans. I think there's better ways to spend money. As my husband said in the letter, as we said in the letter, it's really about the appropriate and efficient use of public funds. And that to me is very, very important part of this process. And communicating with owners. I really don't have anything more to add. I really appreciate your time and consideration of our feelings and our opinions. Matt has communicated with us, Commissioner Cooney, and I spoke on the phone. It's been wonderful, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted Craver, followed by Lee Heller.
I'm concerned
about being redundant because many of the comments have already been made, but I do want to register, again, our concern about the Colville Tunnel in particular. I think it's redundant to the Evans access, which is right there. There really are 3 access points. We've said 2, but there really are 3. The Middle Beach, Padaro, and Evans. And putting in a tunnel for $4 million plus just seems to be an incredible waste of money to do that. There's a lot of flexibility in the Evans proposals. To me, that's a no harm type of proposal. That's one where really everyone can get behind making improvements to the Evans underpass, and we look forward to working with staff and this commission to make that an effective use of public funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Heller, followed by Sharon Burrow. That may be Burley, I'm not sure.
Chair Blau and members of the commission, good morning. I have lived in Summerlin for 15 years as an owner and resident, and I've also been active in policy work with the county for a long time. And I think what's tough for people, and Commissioner Park was really trying to elicit this very helpfully, is what you're supposed to vote on versus what the community wants to communicate with you. So you have a fairly narrow vote command in front of you, which is, are you going to move forward with accepting the proposed approach to revisions to the county's plans so that you can go ahead with the highway expansion project? Or are you going to wait and give the community more time to have the democratic process that Commissioner Cooney is talking about? And that's a tough place for you to be, because you're hearing people in the community saying, we just heard about this. I had just heard about the SCA's proposal. I never got an email about that, so I didn't know what they were proposing. And I didn't hear until last week. The community does want input into what's done, but there's also this really genuine concern that it's going to take a lot of time to figure out where you'd put a tunnel, what it would cost, what the other factors would be, what you do with a railroad crossing. Susie Cawthon came up and talked about an alternative place to situate an underpass. That's new news, right, with significant financial implications. This highway widening project has been a long time coming, and I hate to see the county stopped by the effort to nuance whether or not we have a tunnel or an underpass at one place or another. Summerlin citizens need a lot of input into what happens with this mitigation money, but I don't want to see you delay your vote on today's motion in order to give us that. I think we can do both. I'm also concerned that the Coastal Commission is not going to accept a delay and an alternative, and we know how intransigent they can be, and ditto for Caltrans. When they get dug in on something, the odds of getting them to change are pretty slim. So I would encourage you to vote this forward today, but also instruct staff to talk with us at length about how we can work within the proposed plans and look for additional opportunities with additional money coming in, particularly, hopefully, if the gas tax is not repealed. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Burley, followed by Bob McKay.
I've never spoken in front of this group before, so I don't know the proper greetings. And so, good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning would be good. That's fine.
My name is Sharon Burrell, but a lot of people say Burley. I'm here mostly to talk against the tunnel. I'm very excited about what's going to be happening in Summerlin because I think the beautification is just going to be a wonderful thing for all of us. But the tunnel I don't like, and they keep talking about the tunnel at Butterfly Beach, how beautiful it is, how fabulous it is. We are in Summerlin. I would prefer to compare Butterfly Beach Tunnel to the Wallace Underpass. It's sturdy, it's scary. I walk through there every day. I walk down the middle because I'm afraid to be on the sides. So I'm against the tunnel. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob McKay, followed by Reeve Wilpert. Reeve Wilpert, then.
I have some slides I'd like to show. How do I go about doing that? You can start my time now. I know I'm going to run out of it. The community has never been solidly focused on Colville. That came up at the last moment. Because we hadn't had the opportunity before in a healthy dialogue with staff to consider other alternatives. Connectivity was mentioned earlier in the discussion, Summerlin is thoroughly disconnected from the coastline. It's not a matter of more beach access. It's a matter of the residential core, the urban grid, to be connected to the ocean side of the freeway. It's not just beach access. Let's pop past this picture since my time is limited. That's actually a pretty picture of Summerlin at a very awful moment. Here's Carpinteria. Carpinteria is set way back from 101 with lots of character-defining, community-defining space, including parklands, residential, and a lot of commercial area. Next slide, please. And here we have Montecito. You can see 101, you can see the railroad tracks, you can see the Biltmore. The bridge is Olive Mill, heads down by the Coral Casino where the pool is. Lots of beach frontage, lots of character-defining, visitor-serving landscape to benefit the region and the locals. Next slide, please. Here's Santa Barbara, 101. You can see clearly Stearns Wharf, railroad tracks, lots of landscape again, lots of activity. This is the core of Santa Barbara in some people's minds. This is the waterfront. This establishes what it means to be in Santa Barbara. Next slide, please. And now here's Summerlin, packed up against the freeway cutting us off completely, almost completely, from the ocean. We rise up above the freeway. This is probably the only place in the county where the freeway actually rises up above us, down about 2/3 from the top. The freeway is elevated here. It's not elevated elsewhere in the county along the coast. So you can see that large corridor between the highway and the railroad tracks. That's all no man's land. There's a thin sliver of parkland, of beach available to us. Next slide, please. This is the chasm created by 101. That chasm would be about twice as wide if we took out the railroad right away. There are two crossings. There may be three or multiple beach access points, but these are two crossings from the urban grid. The urban grid is up in the upper left, and they're about a mile or so apart. That is not adequate. Next slide, please. This is our Summerlin Community Plan. It's the preamble to the recreation section. The general parks and recreation demand level equation employed by the county is 4.7 acres of parks per 1,000 population. Currently, the study area, that's the Summerlin area, park land population ratio is well within the county criteria. This was established in 1989. I imagine it's pretty warped right now, even worse. However, the vast majority of the community's parkland is located south of the freeway, and the overwhelming majority of the residents are on the north side. You can see that in the slide. Next slide, please. These are the overarching views of our Summerlin Community Plan, updated twice now. Reconnect Summerlin to the shore, increase access to recreation, unify the community, complete Summerlin pedestrian loops, regional visitor-serving trail connectivity, a vibrant business district, parking for residential, commercial, and visitors, enhance Summerlin seaside character. Next slide.
Mr. Wilpert, thank you. Your time is up.
These will be very instructive to you should you really want to understand the problems that we're facing in Summerlin. These next few slides, just click through them for a moment, please.
Mr. Wilpert, thank you.
I'll say no more.
Thank you. Sandra Morrison, followed by Kay Renner.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sandra Morrison. I'm a mom of 3 kids in Summerlin and new to this process and everything that's happening here today. I'm trying to get my thoughts together and understand what is happening, the technicalities of all the county parts, section 354A, B, C, all this kind of stuff, and understanding that what is happening today is passing something that is not debating what us in Summerlin have to come to an agreement about. However, I'm very glad for the clarification that the list of projects that is on the list is pretty much going to be what is going to be on the table for the future of the construction. And I just wanted to comment that we've only moved to Summerlin 4 years ago with our kids, and I appreciate so much what I think has historically been good planning, citizen input, and forethought into how Summerlin looks today and how we appreciate it today. And I'm just nervous that with all the rush and everything that has to happen and push these projects through, that I'm not sure who came up with these 3 projects and whose input was sought. But as a very active family with 3 kids who we bike everywhere, we go through the Montecito underpass regularly, happily. For instance, we use the beach a lot. My concern is that the Coastal Commission, in approving these projects, they don't speak to me as connecting the coast with the community in any way. A bike path, I bike almost every day. Our kids bike. The bike path through Summerland I have no problem with, and I appreciate spending taxpayer money. When I bought the house, I appreciated the highway was running through it, and I certainly want to be careful with how taxpayer money is spent. So $4 million for a tunnel or whatever else, I question $4 million for a bike path where an adequate path is already there. And if I was going to take my kids on it now, if I'd rather have a better one, I'd have it on the other side of where the cars don't go, but on the bluff tops. Or, anyways, all of these things just speak to me as I'm scared that it's being rushed and proper considerations aren't being taken. And perhaps that is the wrong comment for this stage. I don't know. I apologize if it is. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Katie Renner, followed by Cardell Iverson.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Renner, and I live in Summerland. I'm a citizen, and I'm here to thank you very much for having the county come to Summerland to speak to us. It's the first time that we all got together to discuss your plans. However, I would like to say we had many different opinions. Some people like the underpass, some people don't like the underpass. There are tons of opinions. We don't have one voice, therefore we don't have power right now. However, that is because we were never told about these projects. They seemed, when I was sitting there, that it was a done deal in pen, and that what the citizens of Summerland want or do not want is really not important. It's already been discussed and settled among you. So I thank you so much for coming to speak to Summerland citizens, but I'm here to ask you to continue to speak to us, and that we don't rush things, that we live there, we're the ones that live there that we won't like, and that hopefully we can continue working together with you before we accept what's going to happen. Thank you.
And I think it's Carol Iverson, if I got that right this time. Yes. It looks like a D to me, so I didn't mean to mispronounce your name.
That's totally fine. Hi, I'm Carol Iverson, and Chairman Blau and Commissioners. I think that the main thing I want to say now is to echo a lot of what I've heard, that we appreciate so much having had this extra time. I was expecting, though, and I think I said this in a letter to you, more interaction, not just one meeting, one night, which, as others have said, was a great start, but a little late, even in that period that we were given to have more input. So please, it needs to continue. We feel like we live on Highway 101, those of us who live on the hillside. It's with us every day. Every bit of that construction is going to be with us every day, all the time. We're not going to be able to escape it in the way that others probably have, and I'm sure Carpinteria had a tough time, but as you saw from those slides, I think, which were impressive, we are right there, and it's on top of us, we're on top of it. So we need time, all of us, to come to a consensus and understand what the projects will be and what's best for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Pandesky, followed by Henry Whedon. Panofsky. Oh, that's another, it looks like a D to me, sorry.
Thank you. Chairman Blau, Commissioners, good morning. I know it's been a long morning up to this point. I'll do my best to be brief. My name is Eric Panofsky. I'm a Summerland resident, and I'm here representing myself as a citizen. I'm also here representing my 4-year-old daughter, Willow. As a parent, it's my responsibility to plan for my daughter's future and as a planner to make the best decisions that I can, supported by as much learning as is possible. As a parent, having a leadership role in her life, it's also my responsibility to create the best environment for my daughter that I can. Similarly, citizens of Santa Barbara County look to their leaders to make the best decisions, supported by as much learning as is possible. A month ago, we convened at this location to review the package of projects presented by the county planning staff to the Board of Commissioners. We heard from many Summerlin residents, as we have today, regarding the importance of evaluation of the package in consideration of those projects included, as well as some omitted. The Board of Commissioners agreed that additional time and engagement with Summerlin was appropriate. You know that, that's you guys. Since the hearing, Summerlin has had a single point of engagement, which was a presentation of the same package of projects with statements of inexorable permanence to the package, that no modifications would be considered, and that should additions be made, they would need to be made with independent funding and study. So much has been learned by planning staff since the original package of projects was assembled. In 1 month's time, we were able to evaluate the viability of and cost of a pedestrian undercrossing, I'll call it, not a tunnel, at Colville. Couldn't another month serve the same need to evaluate the viability of an undercrossing at a more appropriate location that's farther from Evans? Shouldn't this learning be applied to the package of projects themselves, the opportunity for evaluation instead of forced acceptance? We've heard from Summerlin citizens weighing in on individual projects. This may seem an inappropriate setting, as you voiced, for this kind of comment, but the reason the opinions are being voiced in this venue is that there has not been an opportunity preceding this moment for Summerlinders to engage with planning staff, our leaders, and we desperately want to be heard. A large focus of the statements made at the previous hearing and this one are regarding a pedestrian undercrossing. The reason for this is that those most passionate, whether for or against, about this project without other opportunity for involvement have spoken loudest. In all, this evidences the high level of interest from the community and the need for proper dialogue between citizens and planning staff. I ask that additional time be granted so that appropriate learning may take place, be applied to the package of projects for reevaluation, and that the best decisions be made for our region, our community, and our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Henry Whedon, followed by Gary Robinson.
Hi there. I'm Henry Whedon, 45-year resident of Summerlin, and John Clark and I were the 101 committee, the 80s, 90s, more years than I care to remember. The point I'd like to make is safety, and the reason that we need a pedestrian tunnel to give the community access to the beach side is a safety question. Evans Avenue is already way overused, and we're going to actually be funneling more traffic through there. If that area were shut down due to an accident, and we've seen numerous accidents on 101 in that area. The one that really comes to mind was when the gas tanker crashed on the Sheffield overpass and shut down that entire area. At that time, President Reagan and his wife had to be airlifted from the freeway to their ranch. And by having a sole access at Whitney, if there was something that shut that down and a resident on the beach side had a medical emergency, it would be be extremely difficult and time-consuming for emergency personnel to service them. We need an alternative. By putting all your eggs in one basket, and we've seen this historically. I've grown up with the freeways. With accidents on the freeway, it's never if, it's only when. And if that were to occur, you would isolate everyone on the beach side of the freeway. Dog walkers, children at the playground, how are they going to get home? they're going to walk down the freeway to Padaro and back. This is not realistic. And you keep talking about Colville. I've been told by old timers that there was an undercrossing at Hollister, where the dirt parking lot next to the gas station exists, and that was covered up. And to me, that would be a far superior alternative to Colville, because it won't affect any of the residences down on Wallace. The other point is, by doing that and having a pedestrian overcrossing, it gives them easy access to the park entrance and the crossing at the railroad tracks. And it's the thing about the parking down there, the only people that really make sense for are the employees of the businesses, so that they can park down there, have easy access to work, and free up the parking in town so that it becomes far more functional. And we got to relieve the pressure on Evans by it's already a problem. And you talked about pedestrians using the east side. The post office is on the west side. People do their postal stuff and they walk down the underpass on the west side.
Great, thank you.
More so than the east side.
Thank you, Gary.
Enough said. Thank
Great.
you.
Gary Robinson, followed by Ed Franz.
Thank you, Chairman Blau and other commissioners. My name is Gary Robinson. I'm a resident of Summerland. I submitted a letter to you, so I won't go into any detail about that. And I will be brief because I really echo the position articulated by Andy Newman, which I think is the issue here. I'm very concerned about the process that has been followed by the county in how these package of projects came up, how they were presented to the community, and the lack of opportunity and the lack of any input opportunity from the community. My understanding is we can't consider meetings prior to October of last year. October of last year was the first time that Summerlin was ever presented with this package of projects. No input had been, they were presented by county staff, and it was an informational meeting. They said, you'll have plenty of time to consider these and get back to us. The next time there was any public meeting with the citizens of Summerlin was May 30th. Many of us, 80 to 100 people, showed up at that meeting, expected to hear from the county about this package of projects and why they felt they were in the best interests of Summerlin. We were told that they were all etched in stone, that our input could only be given as to the redesign of Evans Avenue. That is not how this public process is supposed to work. Discussing many of these projects with other citizens of Summerlin, it's clear we don't see the benefit of them to Summerlin. A bike path benefits the bicyclists, but how does it benefit the businesses and residents of Summerlin? We have lost 10 businesses on Lily Avenue in the last 3 years. Most of those are still vacant because nobody wants to rent them without knowing the true impacts of 101. I'm concerned that if we don't have a vibrant business community in Summerlin, it affects all of our property values, whether you're on Fenney or whether you're on the north side of the freeway. As Mr. Newman said, the meeting was well attended, a lot of talent in that room, a lot of rational thinking. We need more time to consider not only the package of projects that have been recommended by the county, many of which may be quite good, but also other considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Franz. And that's my last speaker slip, so if there's anybody else that wishes to address the commission, you'll please bring one forward.
Let me be the last to say good morning, Chair Blah, commissioners. My name is Ed Franz. I work for the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, which is a countywide bike advocacy organization. And I just really want to thank you all, the staff, and the community for this process and this, unfortunately, tricky opportunity that we have. The creation and inclusion of the California Coastal Trail and coastal enhancements as part of the HOV lane project is something that is very significant. It's a challenge, but it's a good challenge to have. Previously, these needs were outside of the funding scope of the HOV project, and previously these did not reflect previous state funding priorities. Well, state funding priorities have shifted, and this project and our county and regional staff have been able to be nimble and shift and actually successfully bring needed funding to this community, both for the 101 HOV and for these bikeway, pedestrian, and coastal access enhancements. Unfortunately, it seems like we are in the land of constraints and trickiness in Summerland. As a former Summerland resident, I absolutely understand both the challenges in terms of engineering and alignments, but also the earnest desire to really get a tricky but lovely area of our coast as best enhanced with this opportunity that we have. So with that, if I could just say, I appreciate being here this morning and hearing this discussion, and I look forward to this moving forward. Obviously, there are decisions that need to be made at the sort of level of this SB1 funding and coastal permitting now, but there's also a community discussion that needs to continue, and we look forward to being part of that process. Hopefully within limitations that we are living within, future consideration of potential alternate alignments like alternate tunnels or even alternate bits of south side, ocean side pathway could be considered, but we are within the constraints that we are today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to ask staff if they have any comment based on the public comment.
Chairman Blau, members of the commission. I think it's possible today to do both. I think it's possible to approve the action that's before you today, and I think it's possible to continue the dialogue with the community that they're asking for. By way of example, from another process that happened associated with 101 HOV was the desire for a roundabout project to be proposed at Olive Mill and North Jameson. And the members of the public spoke about the need for circulation improvements there. They compelled the SBCAG board to consider a transportation project as a part of that. But as Greg indicated, it was identified as a parallel project. And so what they did specifically is they did not include it in the project description in the EIR associated with 101 HOV. So they didn't tie it directly to that effort. But they did say, staff, go away and work to find funding, work to determine the feasibility, work on the facility as a separate project, and formed a project development team to that effect and was able to do two things. They were able to advance the 101 HOV project, and they were able to continue the dialogue with the community about that transportation facility. I think that exact same situation is present today, where you can move forward with the package of amendments that are in front of you, and also ask for that we continue the dialogue with the community, that we continue to look at these separate, perhaps parallel projects, if there is desire and consensus in the community that these are a good thing for Summerland in the future. I think you can do both.
So my question for you,
our long-standing goal for bringing that to fruition. We did, as you heard, had many meetings with the community over the years in the context of the HOV project and what we needed to achieve there with the very limited funding climate that we had at the time. More recently, with this process that's really been driven by the Coastal Commission through the LCPA process, it has changed the context in terms of these discussions and these projects that would have a relationship to the HOV project but not be part of the HOV project. So I just want to highlight the fact that we're supportive of the package, but we're also concerned about this package continuing to change. And we're, all along I would say Caltrans has been participating in the process. We're a bit agnostic. We support bicycle and pedestrian improvements. This package I think does support and provide for connectivity for bicycle and pedestrians in this corridor, as well as enhanced coastal access. So that's a great thing. We're completely supportive of that. It's the concern on our part would be if we continue to change this package or we continue to add things as we get closer to constructing elements in this corridor with the HOV project. We're needing to have a high level of certainty in terms of our process moving forward to bring these improvements into construction. And so we're certainly going to need permits from the county and a lot of other resource agencies. We're participating in this process and other processes to try to bring that to a close. But adding things and continuing to have new items coming in that's a requirement of the permitting process is going to be more and more disruptive as we move forward. I just want to also highlight all the things come together. We're happy to participate in that effort, and provided that we can work out the safety, security, and maintenance implications, we can entertain pedestrian crossing and undercrossing opportunities in the community separate from the HOV project. That's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Thank you. So does the commission have any further questions? I don't see any. Commissioner Cooney.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I don't want to delay our deliberations unnecessarily, but I do think it needs to be said that what the community perceived as an opportunity to participate in the mitigation of some considerable intrusion into environmental resources in Carpinteria at the bottom of Toro Canyon is really not what happened. I think the Coastal Commission strongly feels that they're talking about more than just the community of Summerland when they support those particular issues, and they're right in line with other Coastal Commission improvements advocated up and down the California coast. So I really think the community got the impression that it was their decision what happened in Summerland, and it really isn't. Now, whether the community would have an opportunity to advocate at this time for future funding on public projects that would directly benefit Summerland, not just incidentally as part of the California coast, I think remains to be seen. But I've heard encouraging comments from staff, and I'm sure Mr. Daubertine is right at the front of that, that he will make his time available to participate, encourage such meetings in the future, and I hope before the day is out, some time frame is set for the community association to meet on this level to see what the projects do. Caltrans project, if it wasn't for the formation of the SBCAG participating financially in this, I don't think we'd have a lot to say to Caltrans at all about the HOV lane. But fortunately, we have some input, and I think we're convinced that widening the freeway in this way is a benefit to all of us on the South Coast, as well as the greater population of California. So I think we need to move forward with this process today, closely joined by the commitment of our staff and SBCAG staff and Caltrans to keep the lines of communication open. Don't end up at the end of the decision before the people of Summerland get to voice.
It's like you don't put one piece of concrete in the dirt. So I'm kind of hoping we get smarter in California and learn how to build roadways with a little less cost and a little less overhead. But having said that, I do believe this needs to go forward. So Commissioner Cooney, I'm not sure you made a motion because I think Commissioner Parks thought you did and you seconded it, but I'm just going to confirm that with you.
I advanced the spirit of the motion, but I
Okay.
think we need more specificity.
Okay, great.
Staff has listed the recommendations for our action on page 11 of our presentation today. I want to be sure, Ms. Harris, that we include the adoption of policy 7.33 as an amendment to our coastal plan as well, and appreciate staff for thinking to include that, and and even going so far as to get the Coastal Commission input on that as well. I heard a good joke about the Coastal Commission, but I'm not going to share it now. So that would be my motion, page 11 of our action, and the inclusion of policy 733.
Okay, I'll second that one. That's my
great.
second.
That's great. Thank you very much. Being no further discussion, Mr. Villalobos, if you'll read the roll.
Commissioner Park.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Farini.
Aye.
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Chair Blau.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Do we have any other further business today? Seeing none, we're adjourned.